Here tonight for the RTM hearing schedule. Before we proceed, let us say the Pledge of Allegiance, if we may. To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, Tom. My pleasure. The first item on the agenda tonight is the First Selectman's summary budget presentation. Good evening. Good evening, Mike.
That's better? Okay. Just some guidance, if you would.
Sure.
I went through this on March 4th for the Board of Finance and Board of Selectmen in joint session. Do you want me to go through this again? You want me to take some highlights from
Why don't you
what I
just
presented?
highlight your presentation at that time,
Okay.
if you will, and if in fact you're referring to any specific pages in the budget, if you would kindly just address those pages so it's easier for the RTM members to locate exactly where you're talking.
Yeah. What I'm referring to is the PowerPoint that I originally presented at that point. So I'm just this. I may reference some departments and some specifics, like where some of the headcount issues were. So I'll.
The First Selectman is referring to the PowerPoint presentation that was previously provided to the RTM members. So, do you have it? I believe, yeah, it should be on the town, yeah. It's on the town website.
It's from a while ago.
Why don't you proceed, Michael?
I'm going to skip over some of the introductory remarks that. There's a page in this that's called Challenges, and I wanted to go back and just recap some of the things that we either have been recently through or are still experiencing that still impact the challenges when we put together a budget like this and for our town. The economy is still recovering from a recession. We've survived hurricanes and snowstorms. We found PCBs in our schools. We have a number of unfunded state mandates, especially in special education. We've got growing concerns about public safety and school security. We have slower grand list growth and minimal growth in non-tax revenues. The net result of that certainly is that any expense growth we have has got to be funded primarily by an increase in taxes. On the positive side, we've got a strong financial foundation. Our budget cost drivers are more manageable. We've got a full AAA rating. It was not only restored but validated this past December. We've got a strong local economy with low commercial vacancy rates, some of the lowest in Fairfield County. We've got a vibrant downtown with restaurants, arts, culture, entertainment, and we've really become a destination spot for the region, which is channeling a lot of that. I did go through and restate the vision statement for Fairfield. That's the same statement that I used at the State of the Town, so it was presented to this body at that point, so I will skip that for now. The budget objectives were to manage our expenses and still provide high-quality services to our residents. The plan for enhanced security was a separate proposal that was presented to the Board of Finance and Board of Selectmen. That is included in the budget before you. When the Board of Selectmen made their adjustments to the budget, they included the school security, both headcount in police, equipment in police, and training in police. There was no significant reduction in essential services. We funded our long-term obligations, pension, OPEB or retiring medical, and surplus. One of the comments that came out of the Board of Selectmen and Board of Finance joint hearings is there are only about 15 towns in Connecticut that are fully funding their ARC on OPEB. So we're in rather exclusive company there. I was surprised it was that low when our actuary mentioned that. We provide support and funding for a top-quality school system, and we are continuing to strengthen our financial foundation in this budget. We've actually put in there that we have budgeted a contribution to surplus. In simple terms, we're one of the few towns, the only town that I know of, but I'm going to say one of the few towns, that is actually budgeting to spend less than we bring in. Then I went through a series of budget recommendations. These numbers have changed a little bit, as you're well aware, because of the adjustments by the Board of Selectmen and by the Board of Finance. But at the time, I was recommending a 2.67% mill rate increase. I believe that's down to approximately 2.38% today after the two boards have reviewed that. The budget included just over $156 million for Board of Education to support and maintain our highly valued school system, and that represented at the time a 3.32% increase. Simply put, that was $800,000 less than the Board of Ed had approved. $400,000 of that was what I call expense reductions, $200,000 in reduced electricity costs, $200,000 in reduced pension contribution. Both those pieces of information didn't become available until after the Board of Ed had voted, so they couldn't include that in there. The other $400,000 I'm leaving to the Board of Ed to find some cost containment measures or improve productivity to adjust. That's roughly, the Board of Ed itself added $100,000 on, so that's really a $300,000 reduction to the budget that the superintendent had presented. And then overall, from the initial request, including that $800,000 for the Board of Ed, I reduced the budget $3.8 million before I'd recommended it to the Board of Finance and Board of Selectmen. The details of all of that are in the budget book. You can see the different columns, so you can see where those reductions are. As mentioned, and as you're well aware, the Board of Education is our largest budget driver. Board of Ed represents 61% of the overall tax increase as it stood in my recommendation. There are certain school costs that are included in the town side of the budget. These are costs that we report every year to the state. So what we did is go back and take that analysis or state form and broke it out here. The certain school costs included, there's a component of debt service. Obviously, we spend a lot of our bonding on building schools and renovating schools, so that's not a surprise. Workers' comp, which is roughly split 50-50 between the town and the Board of Ed. Insurance for liability, errors, and omissions. Health, our school nurses, as you had a discussion on earlier. Police costs, including crossing guards, DARE, school resource officers, and now the school security component. Our purchasing department does a lot of work for the school. Unemployment insurance, and then some other costs in finance, Department of Public Works. But it amounts to about $24 million on the town side of the budget that is used for the school system. If you add those in, the total cost of our school system is over $180 million, and that represents 63% of our overall budget. And I can't think of a stronger statement about the town's support for education than realizing that we're supporting to that amount of our budget. We've talked about cost drivers for the last few years, and there is a page of those in your budget book. But in addition to the Board of Ed, the top three drivers are pension, OPEB or retiree medical, and salaries. You'll be hearing more on pension and OPEB, I think, a little bit later this evening. Pension costs should be stable for the next few years based on our projections from our actuaries. And our employee labor unions have worked with this administration to settle contracts in the last year, as you're well aware, because they come through the RTM. And this has contributed to slower labor growth, both because of increased contribution to health care as well as a number of other adjustments. In addition to those, one of the things that doesn't get enough publicity or awareness are the cost-saving measures that our department heads are driving for day in and day out during the year. I just want to take a moment to highlight some of those. You see Mr. Bowman come through, but in energy conservation and the use of increasing our sustainability and use of alternative fuels, we are literally saving millions of dollars over the years. Our health care services that we bid out last year provided for major reductions in last year's budget, again, as you're well aware. Our recent labor union settlements that I mentioned, electricity and fuel cost purchases. Twig Holland in purchasing does a great job of looking out and making sure that we're buying fuel at the right point in order to get the best deal over the next 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, based on where the trends in fuel are going. We did save some money from the original estimates in the fall when we started putting the budget together. Those reductions in motor vehicle, lube, and fuel have already been accommodated in this budget, and that's what's let us lower some of the costs that were originally included in the estimate. One of the logistical issues in putting together a budget, we start putting it together in December. I think the Board of Ed may start a little bit earlier than that in November. You're working with the best available information that you have at that point. So as new information comes out, we've tried to include that in the budget as we go. Case in point, the electricity reduction that we got for the Board of Ed, that wasn't available before the Board of Ed voted. If it was, Dr. Teitel would have included it in his recommendation to the Board of Ed. So as we get that information out, we try and include it in here. So at each point, we're getting better information. And you'd expect that, because December was 3 or 4 months ago. November was 4 or 5 months ago. There's just better information. Sometimes those costs may go up. We've been fortunate in recent years that those costs have gone down. We're using new ticketing and permit software and technology, both in police and in the parking authority. We've got new tax collection software, which we had a few speed bumps with, but it looks like that's sorted out, and that's providing productivity improvements in our tax area. We've got a new town website that went live last Friday night. And actually, we've gotten a lot of feedback. There are a few hiccups, but relatively small hiccups. And appreciate the feedback from members of this body coming back in. I thought it was... I've been very impressed with both the ease of use and the additional information. We really got all the department heads in. You'll find a lot more content in this website, a lot more frequently asked questions. The goal, again, when you talk about productivity, is not only to provide more information to our residents, but get them the questions and the answers they need so that they can spend less time on the phone with our people and free up time that way. We also have a safety committee and increased training in workers' comp. Workers' comp, when I took office almost 3 years ago, was out of control. It had gone from 1.5 to 2 million to 2.5 million in the annual budget. For those of you that were around back then, realize that one of the first things I did in my first budget was put additional money into the Workers' Comp Internal Service Fund to address part of the issue there. We also went back, formed a safety committee across the town and Board of Ed, because again, workers' comp, the workers' comp number you look at in the book is a combination of Board of Ed and the town. So we had cooperation on both sides. We put together a safety committee to focus on keeping people from getting hurt, which is really what this is all about. The collateral benefit is we save money. The primary focus is to keep people from getting hurt. We've been able to do that, and you're starting to see that turnaround in this year's budget, and the workers' comp is a lower number than it has been. On the staffing side, we started with, I'm going to tell you where we started. There have been adjustments made to this, so it's not current, if you will. We started with 3 part-time employees added in the health department. That's been adjusted by 1, so that's down to 2 part-time employees. And that's specifically to meet, as you heard from Sands, additional mandates from the state in terms of the amount of time that has to be spent with students in planning sessions. And what that means is there's not enough available time for just basic health care duties. And the nurses are doing more administration than work because of that So that's what SANS was trying to address with this ad. In the finance department, we had added one part-time position to help in a number of areas, including preparation for a financial plan. And in the IT department, we had added a half year of a full-time position. And I believe both the finance department position and the half-year IT position are gone, so that's not something that is before you at this time. Then went back, and I wanted to look at some of the history and trends in terms of where the town has come from and where we are. So I went back 10 years. I used 2003 to 2013. The reason for using 2013 was that was the last full year for which financial statements were prepared for us and the surrounding towns. We were in the process of doing the 2014 financials. We weren't sure we could get all the other towns' information together, so we took the best available information. A couple interesting things. One, our population in 2003 was 57,700. Our population in 2013 was 59,000. So relatively stable. Our total expenses had gone from 168 million, and I'm using round numbers, in 2003 to 270 million in 2013. Expenses per capita, per person. When you look at the town, we're basically a service business. Many of our services, in fact, I'm going to suggest almost all of our services relate to the size of our town, the number of people we have. If we had 500,000 people, these costs would be dramatically higher than what they are today. If we had 5,000 people, they'd be dramatically lower. So I wanted to look at expenses per capita. What does it cost us per person? What are we spending per person to provide the services in our town? In 2003, that was $2,900, just under $3,000 per person. In 2013, that was $4,500. A couple of other interesting numbers. Because of decisions that our town made, back in 2003, our pension contribution was zero. Today, actually in 2013, it was $5,436. All right, so our pension costs didn't go from zero. We just weren't making a contribution, so our contribution went from zero to $5,400,000. Same thing on OPEB. Back in 2003, our OPEB contribution was $1,800,000. Because we weren't meeting our ARC, we weren't fully funding it. At that point, we didn't have the GASB rules hadn't changed to have us record that on our balance sheet. So Fairfield, like every other town, just wasn't doing it. Since then, we've gone from that 1.8 million up to 8.8 million in 2013 as part of our OPEB costs. And that 2013 number was the, let me check, Bob? 2013, that was the last year rolling up, so we were at our full ARC then. So 2013, we had ramped up as we funded our OPEB. In 2013 was the first year we fully funded our OPEB ARC. And in the budget before you, again, both the pension ARC and the OPEB ARC are fully funded, per the actuarial recommendations. A number of people. In 2003, we had 471 town employees. In 2013, we had 465. We had fewer people working for the town in 2013 than we did 10 years earlier. Board of Ed expenses had gone from 93 million in 03 to 148 million in 2013. As much as our town population had stayed the same, I just want to point out, as I think, again, most of you know, that the school population had gone up dramatically over that time period. In terms of tax revenue per capita, our total tax revenue went from 146 million to 250 million. The tax revenue per capita, tax revenue per person, had gone from 2,500 to 4,200 in that same time period. And I will just add one other stat here. When you look at how we pick the drivers and how big a deal health insurance is, our health insurance cost per employee in 2003 was $7,600. In 2013, it was $21,000 per employee. Right? So that's that health insurance trend we experienced, as was experienced across the country. It's not a Fairfield issue per se, but certainly that's one of the challenges in controlling our expenses. So if you look at a 10-year growth in expenses from 2003 to 2013, our overall expenses went up $102 million. And that represents a $55 million increase in the Board of Ed, a $10 million a year increase in debt service, $7 million in OPEB, $6.3 million in health insurance, $5.5 million in pension, $7 million in salary costs, and just under $11 million in everything else.
Thank you.
And I think that's roughly it. Let me just take a quick look and see if there's anything else that we should highlight.
If we may, in keeping the schedule tonight, might we entertain questions with respect to the budget? Yes, David?
Mike, thanks for a very good overview. Just two questions. One, in talking to Human Resources in Ridgefield, they use an outside insurance company, and their average per family is about $19,000, and I think, as you pointed out, we're 21, or I thought maybe 22. Is it time for us to think about doing that as opposed to being self-insured?
When we went out to bid last year, we bid both full premium as well as self-insurance to kind of check on that. The simple answer is no, and part of that's structurally how that takes place. But what I'm going to do to answer that question is ask Bob Mayer to address that specifically. But there are some tax issues that you get into when you have premiums, as well as the premium structure. But that's something we look at when we review our insurance costs. But Bob, could you help with that?
Do you need further explanation?
I think for now, in the interest of time, I'll just accept the fact you're looking at it, and I'll talk offline.
Yeah, we not only looked at it, we evaluated it last year, and if it had been cheaper, we would have gone to it last spring.
Okay, just one other quick question. The goal is to keep seniors in the town, which I'm interested in because I am one. Do we have a way of measuring that in between census?
You know, I'm not sure on that. We have been using census data, and I don't know if do we collect any senior information in the assessor's office, Don?
I've got some.
All right. Tom has some. What I've seen when I looked at when the Senior Center group did their report, they went out and Millwood Brown went out and did a survey of everybody, of 6,000 seniors, and they used nationally available numbers or other surveys. So I'm going to tell you, we don't track that individually in the town beyond what Tom was able to collect as part of the senior tax relief group.
Okay, thank you.
Further questions? Yes, Chris.
How are you? Thanks for the report tonight. I have two questions. One is, in this budget, is there anything close the town, are you looking at anything closely to outsource out of this budget? Anything you'd like to see move to the private side, or anything from the private side in this budget you'd like to see us try to do in-house, which might save us costs over the long run?
Yes and no.
Well, how about some examples?
Most of the functions we've looked at are the items to outsource. The Golf Course Commission announced last year they were taking a long, hard look at what their costs were of the golf course, and was there a way to outsource that and save any money. You heard Scott Bartlett talk about how much subcontracting we already do out of DPW. There are a number of other areas that have brought up that we are in different stages of looking at, but for the most part, just starting to look at. It's been a help, frankly, to get a full staff back in my department, which has freed me up to do a little bit more planning in this regard and take a look at it. We have talked with the Board of Ed, and there's a series of ongoing discussions as to what we do there. The Board of Ed actually has outsourced or contracted out a lot of their lawn maintenance, that type of thing. So at one point, the suggestion was the town should take that over. But they're basically outsourcing to the same people that we're using to outsource it to, so we've kind of effectively done that without having to take it over.
So I guess let me drill down a bit on the Public Works and the contract for that. Are there contracts which we're signing right now as a town, which we could have a portion of that project or a percentage of that project being done in-house? For example, our engineering department, could they be doing a portion of that if there's a study which has to be done or some sort of pre-project plan or map or stuff which has to be done? Are all of those being looked at to sort of chip away at the overall contracting costs?
Oh, no question. We do it. The engineering department does an awful lot in-house right now. And we continually, and if we can handle it in-house, we'll do it. The question just becomes the project. In some cases, we can get reimbursed for the costs.
Right.
That makes it sometimes easier to go outside.
Okay. So, and my next question is, with health insurance, is the town doing anything now to help absorb or plan for the affordable health care Cadillac tax, which is coming?
Yes, we are. Two things. One, the first step in that is to make sure we do our best to understand it. We've had several presentations from the folks from Aon that you've heard talk before. We've had some presentations and gone to some discussions. Both Human Resources has gone. I've gone to some that have been put on by CCM, which is our Conference of Cities and Municipalities. Mr. Mayor has spent a lot of time studying up on this, and fortunately his background's in healthcare, so that's been a huge help in terms of resource. One of the challenges is that, as we've seen, some of the items move, but the other big one is that as we get into some of the stuff, it's not as defined as we'd like in all areas. As you kind of keep peeling back the onion and say, what does this mean?
Right.
It's not quite as defined as we'd like, but we are looking at what we have to change in our healthcare plans, and that is part of some of our negotiations with our labor unions at the moment.
So has our health insurance carrier given us an estimated number of what the Cadillac tax is going to cost the town?
I don't think we've looked at that number per se, have we? We've gotten some ranges back on it, is what
Okay.
Mr. Mayor just said.
Any interest in sharing those ranges with us?
We can probably get that. We don't have that right now tonight.
Okay. All right. Thanks.
And again, the issue there is there's a whole bunch of assumptions that are built into that, and it's been immensely frustrating trying to pick a point that we're trying to get to, because as you look at things, there's a lot more flux in the healthcare planning and within the Affordable Health Care Act than I'd like to see.
Questions, Ed? Yes.
Thank you, Ed Bates in District 3. Thanks for being here this evening, Mike. I have a couple of comments and questions on the fund balance in the first section, which I assume refers to the undesignated fund balance and the contribution we're making of $500,000, right?
Correct.
A year or so ago, I was at the meeting when the Board of Finance, it was announced to them the target rate of our undesignated fund balance of possibly being anywhere 10 to 15%. I sent you guys a question, and I followed up with Jim Walsh, who I guess is chairing the committee of the Board of Finance to develop a policy of where we want to be.
I will let you finish. That 10 to 15% number, I'm not sure where you got that. And
That was from Joe Centofanti, where he had said other communities were doing 10 to 15. I followed up with Jim Walsh, and Jim is saying...
Mr. Centrofani's survey group may not be that large, but...
Yeah, no, and I'm getting to, when I followed up with Jim Walsh, the chairman of our committee, he said they're more looking along the lines of 8 to 10%. Does that seem to be what you're thinking as well?
The unassigned fund balance, the one number is, if you look at the AAA towns in Connecticut, the average or the median was about 10%. A lot of those towns were smaller. What we've seen happen over time is that our balance, when I got on the Board of Finance in 2005, we were in like the 3.5 range.
Yes.
We're going to finish this year just over 6, Bob? So we're up at 6.5-ish. That is a dramatic improvement, given the economy, given what other towns are going through, and the rating agencies have been pretty impressed with the progress we've made on doing that. That's been a very disciplined progress, and the contribution to surplus you mentioned was a way of kind of saying, okay, let's make sure that we try to put away some money each year towards doing that. So it wasn't just, hey, we'll see what we have over at the end. We've been fortunate the last couple of years that we've been able to exceed that target range. But specifically, yeah, I think 8% would be something that the putting money in a savings account and in this kind of surplus, the rating agencies don't like to see you take money out of it. So as much as you want to build it up so you have some financial flexibility, you want to be careful about how much you put in, because then you can't get it out again. And
correct, and that's one of the reasons why I have this opportunity with you is, I mean, how do you feel about that? I mean, I have certain thoughts about how I feel about setting aside a pool of money that you really can't touch.
Yeah, the rating agencies are not as consistent in terms of how they look at things. So what you've seen happen in the last year is they've gone back and redefined for themselves how they're going to look at towns. We went through an evaluation from Standard & Poor's in December, which was the first time we were playing by the new rules. And they now tend to look at reserves in groups more than they did before. We knew they used to look at the internal service fund as just a group, so they didn't care if it was a Board of Ed reserve or town reserve or general liability reserve. They just looked at the internal service fund. But now they're tending to stretch that even more across the surplus, looking at what our pension funding is, looking at what our OPEB funding is. So we're now getting more credit and more support for our pension funding, which has always been great. Case point, when we were discussing getting our AAA credit rating restored, losing the negative outlook a few years ago, we sat down with Moody's, and part of the question of Moody's, they pointed out that our internal service fund was a little weak on reserves because it had this negative balance. And I think we were negative $5 million. And the answer was, yeah, we are, but we've got over $300 million in our pension fund. Do you want us to take $5 million out of that and put it in the internal service fund? Because then we'd still be 98% funded on pension. And by the way, there's some AAA towns you have that have a 60% or 70% pension funding, and we're at almost 100%, and it's the same money. You know, both are long-term obligations. Neither has a short-term hiccup in it. So
So the plan to address this, from what I'm looking at, from what our requirement is or what the industry expects us to have, there is a significant shortfall, and it looks like last year I think we put 675. This year it's 500. Any resolution that comes about from your administration of the Board of Finance looks like it's going to have to be spread over a long term for the simple fact that, I mean, there's significant numbers that we are short. Is that your plan, that it's going to be anything we sell to the taxpayer or the rating agencies is going to be spread over a long term?
Oh, yeah. The goal is to go, look, we've got the highest rating there is, right? That's it. We're AAA, stable, all three agencies. We can double our reserves in every category. We could double fund our pension. We're not going to get a higher rating. We're not going to get better interest rates.
But we risk losing it. I mean, we do risk losing it by being this short, don't we? I mean, this is a negative factor on us.
It's one of the negatives in about a 20 or 25 point evaluation. Our internal service fund has a negative balance, period. That's a negative, and that was pointed out when they gave us a negative outlook. They pointed to the internal service fund and said that balance is both negative and increasing, so that's why we're concerned, and that's why we're giving you a negative outlook. So we went back and addressed that first. That's why we put $2 million into the workers' comp fund a couple of years ago.
I see where you're going. I feel this is a significant issue facing the town, and I think that when you or the Board of Finance, when they do come up with a plan, I really think it needs to be shared with this body, because these are significant monies that are going to be taken and held for nothing.
Yeah, and it needs to be shared with this body and everybody else, because we're going to need everybody's buy-in to do that, because that can be, we're
Okay,
gonna need
but just as a recommendation, I don't think this just deserves to be a $500,000 line item in the budget. I think this needs to be a broader discussion with all town bodies involved. Thank you.
Okay.
Representative Devlin?
Got 'em coming from all over. Again, Laura Devlin, and thank you very much for the overview. I just have a couple of questions. First of all, in going through the budget information, it's been helpful to have 13 actuals. We have our 14 budget. Do we have year-to-date 2014 actuals to have as a point of reference to also compare?
Yeah, we cover the actuals every quarter with the Board of Finance, just as a point of reference. We call those the quarterly reviews. The actuals are available up to the month, and we can, Bob, we can get the munis reports and make those available? It's a pretty thick document comparable to the budget book, because it's got all the same accounts in it. So we can make that available.
It's one thing to look at a budget that was established a year ago. It's another to look at when you're 3 quarters in, where are you year to date? So that would be helpful to have. If I need to follow up with Mr. Mayor, I'm happy to do that.
Yeah, if you can follow perhaps with the moderator and find a way we can get that out to everybody, either put that.
Is it online?
That can be put online, we can do that tomorrow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Probably, March isn't closed out yet. And also remember that payables,
Can you come to the mic?
Yeah.
Yeah, please
Just
address that at the microphone so that
Yeah,
we can hear it.
just to repeat that, Mr. Mayor said that we can put that online tomorrow. March is not closed out yet.
Okay.
There are issues with payables, that type of thing, so you don't have clean numbers on that. Would we put the latest numbers up, or would we go through February that's closed?
So you'll put that information online tomorrow?
Yeah.
Fine.
Okay, so just a couple of other quick things. And speaking of online, congratulations on the website. I haven't been through it in depth, but overall, I think it looks really great, a big upgrade from what we've had before. And hopefully we'll be able to move a lot more things online. I know from many of the department presentations, there's certain things that we still have to do, in a traditional way, whether it's placing an ad in a newspaper or doing whatever. But right now, we spend about $270,000 in print and production. And when I look at 2013 actuals compared to where we are in terms of a budget now, it's an increase of about $25,000. So I have a colleague who likes to say, if you count your pennies, they add up to dollars. And I'm looking at those areas as well. Are there more savings that we can gather? And when we look at some of these departments, and you look at line by line, it's a slight increase from one to the other, year to year may not look significant, but in aggregate, it can really add up. So just, in travel is a 15% increase over 2013. In memberships, it's up 10%. In office supplies, it's up like $18,000, another 15%. So is there any direction as our town CEO to all the bodies, like, look, hold it, we are not going over where we spent 2 years ago, that's all you have for these sort of incidental expenses?
The running the town is some cases like running a service business. Where it's not is that we have certain obligations that we have to do. All right? It would be nice just to wipe out all the paper we give the RTM and just say, hey guys, it's all online.
Yes, it would.
Right? I think there are certain legal obligations within the town clerk's office that we can't do quite all of that. There are legal obligations within the conservation department that they have to provide certain things, and that's our biggest use of copy paper is the conservation department, which is kind of ironic when you think about it. So on one hand, yes, but more to your point, we went through this budget literally every line, all right, and look for just that. What do we have? What's the trend been? What's the anomalies? What is this up? Is that part of the trend? Is it just a one-year thing? Do we have to discount that? And we literally talked through that with every department. All right, and that's where the $3 million came from. All right, the $3 million I cut, one number was easy, $1 million out of paving. But short of that, everything else was lots of littles throughout the whole department. So very definitely, we're looking at that. The department heads take that very seriously. And you've heard Sands stand up here last night and say, look, my budget hasn't gone up in 7 years. They take great pride in that.
Thank you. Representative Jacob?
I don't know how. I ended up with more paper than you. Hello, Ellen Jacob, District 9. I'm looking at page 31 in the budget book, and it is the schedules of current year tax levy and tax revenue and a property available for taxation, that page. I had a question about what we actually have in our hands right now, even though we're still missing 1/4 of our tax collection for this fiscal year, the April one. But I'm wondering if the uncollected taxes and any assessment changes due to lawsuit settlements will affect what we actually have by the end of this year and therefore run over to next. Are there any adjustments that we should know about?
Yeah, all the adjustments that we know about are included in here. So these numbers reflect that, with one exception. The most recent adjustments from the Board of Assessment Appeals. And the way that's typically handled is the Tuesday night, if you set the budget on Monday, first Monday in May, the way it's planned, the following night the Board of Finance gets together and sets the mill rate. They do that with the latest information, latest update from the tax collector about what the assessments are, what our grand list is, so they're setting the mill rate against the literally up-to-the-minute information from that standpoint.
So there's no way that we can know that before all the budget decisions are made?
That you could know what?
Any changes that have occurred? I guess I'm worried that we may not have what we think we have in front of us.
On one hand, I'm going to suggest that there's a number of assumptions in here, and a number of these, several of these numbers can go up or down, so I'm not going to tell you we can cast this in concrete just yet. We have to make adjustments here, but that's also what the adjustments to the grand list are caught, and the collection rate are caught when the mill rate is set. So we're using the latest available information at that point. We have a whole explanation behind these numbers, and I'd be happy to have Mr. Mayor come up and explain to you how we got to this collection rate, but you can see we've tried to be conservative with it. It's a little bit lower than what the collection rate was last year, so we're not being overly aggressive there and not making any optimistic assumptions that we'll collect more magically. So
Okay.
we've tried to be both conservative and also well document what our assumptions are.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Just can I
Yep,
ask
sure.
a little related question here about, I noticed on the bottom half of that page, mill rate and tax rate calculation, the properties available for assessment, as you referred, they're slightly lower for 2015. So what do we lose between this year and next in available property for assessment?
Okay, do you want me to answer that now, or would you like because I'm just going to turn it over to the assessor.
Can you give a
at this
very short answer to that?
point? Okay, you want to come up and
Or
say that at the mic?
We've got to move on, but I mean, be brief if you don't mind.
Yeah, no, I don't know what numbers you're referencing to, because if you look at the schedule, we're $46 million higher in 15 than in 14.
You're right, sorry.
Okay,
My
thank you.
mistake. Thank you.
Representative Way?
In connection with memberships, professional fees, travel, educational items, Could you give me just a very brief overview of what that might cover?
Yeah, I think my take's going to be 90%, and I did not add it up and break it out, so that's an estimate. But as I went through those, where are we going, why are we going there, do we have to go there? A number of our professionals, like our engineers, have to maintain certain certifications. In other cases, like in the town clerk's office, Betsy is head of the State Association of Tax Clerks, which certainly has the...
So it's not designated to their department, it's designated to yours?
No. There's one in each department. Which, I'm sorry, what number are you referring to?
I think it totaled...
Are you talking specifically about the First Selectmen's Department?
Yes.
Okay. The biggest number in memberships is CCM, which is about,
Right.
Linda, about 35,000.
Oh, it's that high?
Yeah. And then the U.S. Conference of Mayors is about 5,000. The travel in there is for CCM conference, some of the stuff in state.
Sure.
The only out-of-state trip that is budgeted is going down to D.C. in January to the U.S. Conference of Mayors.
Great.
Thank
That's
you.
exactly what I
Representative
needed to know.
Donovan.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. And I'm losing my voice, so I apologize.
Good timing.
Yeah, it's good for me to lose my voice at this time, absolutely. Hey, with the data you shared, thank you for that. One of the things that I was surprised to see is that Fairfield has the highest rate of unemployment for towns in DRG A and B. So, pretty interesting that some of the ways that we compare Fairfield to other towns, but we have the highest unemployment. At the same time, the town employees are actually the town is the largest employer in the town. So if you look at the number of town employees, including education, it's like 1,900. The next, I think, is GE at 1,700, or what were the numbers?
Yeah, both universities are pretty up there, too, though.
Yeah, but the town is the number one. So given that and the desire to keep, seniors on fixed incomes in town, what is your long-term strategy for budget growth as we look at this? I mean, is it keeping it to inflation? Certainly the numbers that we're seeing now are lower than last year, but what is your long-term view on where to keep those numbers?
Yeah, I think that the first thing we did is identify the drivers, and a number of those were going through some dramatic growth over the last 2 or 3 years. We've finally gotten those under control, so I think we're in a position now to step back and look at that. One of the things we wanted to do is put together a financial plan covering the next few years. Mr. Mayor had put a part-time position in the finance department to kind of help do some of the legwork on that. Not the financial plan, but some of the legwork for putting that together. That got adjusted out of this budget. So we're going to do our best to be creative and see if we can figure out how to make some progress on that front anyway.
When you look at those numbers of employees, 1,900, what are your thoughts on defined contribution versus defined benefit? What are the costs on some of those pension drivers? Okay. Where strategically do you want to see that go in the next 10 years? Yeah,
we've already moved 5 of our 7 unions to defined contribution. The Board of Ed, I think, is moving some of their unions to that basis. The teachers, for most of those employees, the town has fewer employees than we did 10 years ago, as I pointed out. Right. The numbers you're referencing include the Board of Ed. The Board of Ed gets under this, again, that's where unfunded state mandates come down. They start saying you have to have this student-faculty ratio in special ed for this kind of care, or you have to provide this kind of care for students. And that's going to drive the teacher number. So the one component that's missing is kind of what state mandates are we going to have or fund along those lines. Right. From the town standpoint, we have been managing the number of employees. We're providing more services and a higher quality service today than we did 10 years ago.
Right. Part of the things when you look at the unions is you see that it's on incremental hires in places that haven't had a new hire in quite a while. So the impact of actually moving it to a defined contribution doesn't really have a bottom line impact. So, part of it is if you look at what's happened with corporations, it's certainly grandfathering.
Yeah, there's been churn within that. Just because because we have 100 police officers or 100 DPW workers doesn't mean there's been no turnover. There's been turnover within those.
Basically, I think you're saying, that's the right way to go as we look at this going forward. As we go through and we look at the information on revenue projections, as we get the updates from Bob, can we get those same revenue projections? As we were looking through the numbers, things like building electrical and plumbing permits, it seems like the revenue numbers weren't going up as much as they had. The same for recording fees, the same for beach stickers. I assume most of that revenue's in?
Yep, just so we're clear, we went out to the department heads, actually put together that revenue. So we're taking the people that are closest to the action, who see the transactions every day, have the closest finger on the pulse for their business unit within that, and we're using them to build that.
So how do we learn more about why, like, sometimes numbers just look like, they're lower than they have been in prior years?
Talking to the department heads. I
Okay,
mean, that's
so-
what we did.
And we've got time.
What we did through the Board of Finance section is do that. Now, just for this board, the revenue discussion is interesting, but it's not something that you're voting on.
It's certainly not something we're voting on, but would it have an impact if you wanted to cut expense if you thought revenue was going to be higher?
Potentially. And we tried to walk that fine line in putting these together. And there is some additional revenue background. We can give you worksheets that show how we got to those estimates. Is it a formula?
Yeah.
We get $5 a head for whatever happens. Is it a 3-year average?
Right.
Or is there another, is it a government subsidy where they give us a rate and that's what we get, this fixed dollar amount?
Absolutely.
So we can give you that breakout so you have I guess the key here is we didn't make these numbers up. We're trying to get as close to those as we can. And a fine line we're walking. In a perfect world, I'd love these numbers to be as high as they can, because every dollar we bring in a non-tax revenue is a dollar we don't have to tax people.
Yeah, and I think
On the other
DOJ
hand,
probably gives us.
to overestimate the non-tax revenue and have an artificially low tax rate helps us finish in the red rather than the black at the end of the year. So that's the balancing we're trying to do.
Thank you. Mr.
Could I-
Hurley.
Could I just
Yes.
ask one other question? Since
Go ahead.
it kind of came to my mind
ahead.
as John Donovan was talking. Carroll Way, District 5. There has been a move by the RTM to move all new hires to 401As. Am I correct? And I understand that in management that there is, the opportunity to choose whatever you choose. But in the first selectman's office with the new hires, did it go to a defined pension program?
I think we've got a mix. I think we've got one person who's been here for a long time who is on a pension. We've got one person I think is on 401A. I'll have to confirm that for you. I think she's on a 401A because of when she came in. We try and tie it to different unions, so they basically go along with those.
So the first selectman, the
The first selectman
chief
and
financial officer,
first selectman, chief financial officer, the town clerk,
well, the town clerk's been there for quite a while.
but are on the pension program at the moment. Of course, you have to stay around long enough to qualify for that.
Pardon?
You have to stay around long enough to qualify.
Yes,
for
I
that.
understand. Thank you.
Mr. Hurley.
Thank you. Michael Hurley, District 1. Just to circle back to the educational and memberships line in your budget, you had talked about CCM, which I believe is the Connecticut Council of Municipalities. And I remember when I got on the RTM a few years back, and I got a sort of a nice manila envelope sent to me. My wife brought it to my attention, the Honorable Michael Hurley, and how sort of exciting it was to be dressed like that. But I guess it wasn't until several months, if not, probably over a year, until I really understood what the Council of Connecticut Municipalities was. I do read all the emails that I get from them. I find it to be very informative. I've gone to them a few times for various research items for things they're sort of considering on the RTM. I think for the benefit of this body, could you maybe just take 60 seconds and explain what it is and how it's a resource, if you could?
Yep. CCM really performs two broad functions. One is Mike mentioned, they're a tremendous information resource. So if you want to know what towns are doing this, what towns are doing that, I think Tom McCarthy, Representative McCarthy, excuse me, used some of their research during the senior tax relief piece to get some things from that standpoint. When we want to know any host of questions relating to statistical data, they've got a wealth of financial information and ratios that we can get there, as well as they put on a series of conferences throughout the year that we can attend, both from a networking standpoint. I mentioned one of the panel discussions I went to on Affordable Health Care Act. That was a CCM panel, so we had panel experts up there as well as a lot of different municipalities represented in the room. The other big piece they do is they lobby for us, and they lobby for us up in Hartford. So when we talk about unfunded state mandates, CCM is one of the groups that's fighting in Hartford to eliminate unfunded mandates. When we need somebody kind of going to bat for us or to speak for the community, when the panel was put together off of Storm Sandy to look at the hazard mitigation funding, the money for elevating houses, they went to CCM to get a CCM representative on that to kind of speak for us. And they kind of messed it up the first time, and one of the groups I went to complain about that was CCM and said, what were you guys up to? And they made sure that they included our thoughts from the coastal towns the next time that got together, and that changed the decision. So our residents are getting a lot more money because of that.
Thank you. With all due respect, we're getting off the budget issues, and although these questions, many of them are excellent questions, I think to get through tonight, let's stick to the budget issues and move forward. Pam.
Thank you, Mr. First Selectman. Following up on Representative Way's question, many of us are concerned about the long-term liabilities of the town. You mentioned that 5 of our 7 unions have moved from the pension to 501A for new hires. Is the new chief of staff position that started, does that have a choice between a 501A or a pension, or is that simply a 401A?
I will check. 401A? He's on a 401A.
I also think it's important that we lead by example. Is it possible that the First Selectman will be thinking about moving over to a 401A as we try and look to get more of our employees onto that program?
Thank you for your suggestion there, and I'll take that into consideration.
Thank you. I also have questions about how you start your budget process and how you get to your number. You mentioned that you sit down with all of your department heads and you go through things. Would you classify your budget as being zero-based budgeting? Do you go in and make your department heads justify every dollar that they have in their budget, or are you starting off from the number that they had from the previous year?
A combination of both, depending on the line item.
Could you give me an example?
Sure. The labor costs, because those are union controlled, and let's take fire where there's a minimum banning clause, that's not going to start from zero because we have those folks in, and by contract we have to keep them there. In other cases, we go through each line and say, what are we spending, why does it cost that much, and what are we doing that? When you look at the line items outside of the personnel costs, because about 70% of this budget is personnel costs. If you look at the top lines, those are not actually lines that department heads are control of to a certain degree. Social Security, overtime, other than the units they put in. So we go back and look at each of those. So it's a combination based on what we do there. But it is an extensive talk with each department head.
Great, thank you. In terms of the benefits that are offered to department heads and non-union town hall employees, have the co-pays and the medical contributions gone up this year? Do you have an updated sheet, benefits sheet that you could share with the RTM on that?
The benefit sheet on the co-pays within the insurance are kind of tied to the mid-manager program, so we will, as the mid-manager benefits change, those will change. From a standpoint of the premium cost share, the department heads had a dramatic increase last year.
Can you give us an outline of that? Would it be possible for you to send an update in written form to the moderator so that the RTM can understand where they are, where they're going, where they would be going next year?
Certainly.
And I also understand that those people are not union employees, so that they don't need to be tied to that mid-level management union contract. Is that correct?
Correct.
That is just something you choose to do,
That's something that has been the custom of the town for quite a while.
but something under the First Selectman's purview that he could change if he so desired.
Correct.
Thank you. I just have a couple more questions. One is, do you at all have organizational charts for the administration and the employees in Town Hall, just so we have an understanding of how those different departments function, who reports to who? Are those available? Do they exist?
I don't know if we have, that's a pretty big chart, but I think we've got it. We can do it, yes.
Great, thank you. And my Last question has to do with the education and memberships, or fees and professional services. I'm not sure what, I think you said it was education and memberships. The Washington, D.C. Conference of Mayors, can we get a breakout of what that costs and what you think the benefit to Fairfield has been in attending that session?
Oh, absolutely.
Great.
It's,
Thank you.
Yes, Lauren O'Brien.
Lauren O'Brien, District 5. Thank you, First Selectman, for your nice overview. I have a couple of questions regarding some line items. The first one, under the category of...
What page is that?
Page 284, Cultural and Recreation. The second highest line item is fees and professional services. What exactly do they entail? It remains fairly consistent, but it's only exceeded by payroll. What exactly do those entail?
Was that last night?
$284.
284?
Okay, that's the Parks and Rec Department.
Yep. It's,
Jerry Lombardo would be a good person to ask that of.
I think many of us last night were at a Town Plan and Zoning
I
Commission,
apologize.
and I know that Representative O'Brien was there last night representing her district. So that's,
So if it's more appropriate for me to follow it up on my own, I'm happy to do that.
okay. Apparently Jerry is going to get us that information.
Okay, super. Pardon? Oh, I apologize, I was at the zoning meeting.
Thank
for our
you.
district. So a subsequent question, following up on Representative Anconas. The highest cost we have is payroll, labor. My question is, I see quite a wide sweep from year to year in payroll overtime costs. So, and in administrative and general, you know, we go from, there's a swing of anywhere from 100 to 300% from year to year. Health and welfare, it's an even bigger jump. As a town, have we explored, and I don't know the bargaining units, this is my first year as an RTM member, the private sector is looking into ways to control labor costs by some creative measures, if you will. Some people like it, some people don't. Offering comp time in lieu of paid overtime. You know, it speaks to the quality of life for the employees. They get some time with their families. Have we ever investigated that? Because I see different overtime within the different departments, and we say if you save the pennies, the dollars save themselves.
Yeah. Yes, one, we have comp time arrangements in most of our departments right now. The one challenge with comp time, that means that people aren't there when you need them to work with you. The other issue is, and I'm not sure which overtime piece you're looking at, just be cautious. We've had some tremendous overtime swings in the past year due to Storm Sandy, Storm Nemo.
Right, so
As we've gone-
exactly, and that's what caught my attention, because for the administration, it goes way down in 2012. Health and welfare, it goes way up over time for those years, 2012. So I would
Right.
think administratively, you would have had a lot more duties, a lot more to do overtime-wise because of the storm, yet the number is the lowest it's been in 4 years.
Yeah, okay, just to be clear, I worked pretty much every waking hour for about 2 weeks
Oh,
out
no,
of the
I'm
EOC.
sure you did. I'm
Just
not saying that.
Let me finish.
That's,
Okay. I don't get overtime. So that's not going to change. The department heads don't get overtime, and they don't get comp time. So that's not going to change. So when Joe Michelangelo is sitting at the police headquarters for 2 weeks, along with me and a number of the others, we're not getting overtime for that.
and just as a
Thank you.
reminder to the RTM members, last night's presentation on public safety and culture and recreation are on Fair TV, so that you can, again, if you weren't here last night, you can follow up and catch that on Fair TV. Any further questions? Yes, Tom.
Mike, thank you again for your presentation. I have a high-level question, but I think it's important. I'll start off by saying two obvious things. Number one, the drivers, the expenses, in large measure outside of the town's control. There are elements of those mandates and an arbitration system. It makes it difficult for the town to manage its own expenses to the degree perhaps it would like. And secondly, this job, yours and mine, is a lot harder from the outside looking in. But as you pointed out, going back 10 years during the window you cited, the town budget was $100 million less than it was in 2013. I'm looking at a slightly more current window, and that delta drops to 93, which is a positive trend. Also, as you pointed out, the number of town employees less, also a positive trend. But notwithstanding, $93 million over a 10-year period, or it would look like $100 million last year, is breathtaking. And so for that reason, obviously there's a heightened sensitivity to both spending, the budget, and taxes, as we all know. My question to you is this. Going through the budget, since for all intents and purposes the per unit cost of the services the town provide has gone up, and to some extent without our control, I think the elephant in the parlor is that we can at some point in time afford less in the way of services. What that means, I think, is identifying things that we can no longer afford to do. Now, some of that may be as simple as working smarter, not harder, but there will also be things that may involve pain. And that's what makes our job all the more difficult. My question to you, sorry to take so long to get to it, but I had to make those points, is what are we doing in terms of by department? And short answer is fine, but I think we are going to have to identify things we cannot afford to do any longer. Can you speak to, how you're addressing that at this point in time?
Yeah, very specifically, it's been an interesting couple of years here. We've had a number of storms that basically chew up time, and what goes away is some of the planning time you'd like. I lost some staff last year and have that back, so that putting together the strategic plan, which is what's going to address that. I don't think you can do it department by department necessarily, because at some point we do need a tax collector, we do need a tax assessor, we do need a health. I mean, there are certain of those things that we have to have from that standpoint. So I think if you look at it that narrow, you don't get enough of the big picture. And I think we also have to do a comparison to what other towns and communities are doing. One of the things in looking recently, and I've piqued my curiosity, is that it looked like the Westport budget has more non-tax revenue in it. So I don't know if they're kind of carving things out of their tax base and charging citizens separately for that, or they've got some additional revenue streams that maybe we can take a look at too. So there's that opportunity, and now that literally having the staff to do that, that's going to help. But simple answers, I think that's the bigger picture strategic plan that we need.
Right, but again, it's a difficult decision we're going to have to make, because I think in order to live within our means, we're going to have to identify as a town, and this falls on us, it falls on the other bodies, of saying we can simply afford no longer to pay for certain things that we'd like to have, and it's that's a difficult thing, but we have to look and take a hard look at that, and I'm glad you're looking at it, because we have to as well.
Yeah, I think that's got to be a kind of a longer issue, because at some point we're defining who we are as a town when we do that. What services do we offer, which ones don't we? Our many experiments with adjusting expenses in certain areas and cutting back on services certainly has been met with a number of people upset that those services got cut back, and taking people to task for doing that.
Right, and now we're actually expanding services both for school security and for potentially Sam's McCleary shop. So, it just makes the job all the more difficult. And
well, that was one of the reasons we brought school security back under a separate presentation, so we could look at just the costs associated with that. We didn't want that to get mixed in with the normal costs of running the town, if
Understood, and I'm glad you did. Thanks, Mike.
Thank you. The presentation tonight called for from 7 o'clock to 7:30, a presentation by the First Selectman on revenue, fund balance, debt service. Are there any further questions of the First Selectman at this time? And if not, we'll go on to not-for-profits. We will be coming back to the contingency, pension, retiree, medical, and risk management. Seeing none, thank you very much, Mike. And why don't we take the not-for-profits now? They're the next item. And I think the manner in which we should do that is to ask, I see some representatives here tonight that might care to make a presentation, but do any members of the RTM have any specific questions of not-for-profits that they would like to make tonight?
And just to be clear, for a certain number of them, I'll be happy to do my best to answer at least a certain level of question.
Thank you. Questions of the First Selectman for not-for-profits?
Page 125, if you want to look at. That kind of has a summary list. And also, just from a generic standpoint, we're going to look at recommending some changes on this, but not-for-profit is just a bad label for the organizations in this group. We are not making donations. We are, in each of these, paying for services coming back. So they may be, from an IRS standpoint, a not-for-profit, but that is not the way we're treating them. So we're going to look back at, there are several in here that we're going to look at moving to the education budget with their dollars because they're really supporting our curriculum. And they've kind of requested that. I look at Pequot Library as part of our library system, and I'm going to look at, recommend that we somehow include that with the libraries because they share books, share resources, and it is a library, so it makes sense there. We will look at some of the social services components and realize that they are really treating our residents. These are the people most in need that need these services. I went through these, again, sat down with each nonprofit coming into this budget year. I was looking for overlap. I was looking for the ability to eliminate some of these, looking for what is either duplicated or not. I asked each of them to come back and explain in detail what they're doing for Fairfield and for our residents and making sure that at the very least we're getting a good return on our money, that there's not a cheaper way to do it, and there's no duplication. And so that's why I went forward with the recommendations we have here.
Thank you. Questions? Yes, Sheila.
Sheila Marmion, District 6. I'm just curious, Mike, on your perspective on the nonprofit committee that was set up. They gave us a report at the last RTM meeting and made some suggestions in terms of how we look at nonprofits moving forward. I felt strongly it wasn't a strong recommendation in terms of what they were recommending. Can you give us your perspective on what they came up with and where we go from here, really, given that we seem to be in the same place with the nonprofits that we were last year, 2 years ago, even 3 years ago?
Sure. First of all, the not-for-profit committee was a committee set up for the Board of Selectmen. So they reported back to the Board of Selectmen. As this body, I think, can understand, we were given the backup or the PowerPoint for that presentation literally hours before our meeting. And so we had no time to review that. And they went through the meeting. So the Board of Selectmen basically postponed that, and that was January 29th, so it's too far into this budget season to do anything. So we postponed our discussion of that till after budget season so we could take it up. We're going to take a look at that. So I don't mean to speak for the Board of Selectmen because we have not had that discussion. From my perspective, I think these organizations need to be grouped separately. I think that some are providing what I'll call social services, very important services, especially in the mental health area, to many of our residents, at little or no cost to our residents. And that's extremely important. These are the folks most in need with significant issues. And I'm very concerned about mental health, one part because that was one of the big talking points that came out of Newtown, and I don't mean to bring that up, but it was. We talked about that, and I haven't seen an example of any town or any state or even the nation doing much in that regard. So I think we have an opportunity to do that. The other challenge of mental health for the organizations that treat that is their clients aren't going to stand up before you and say, yeah, I used them. They were great. I was really messed up. They're not going to do that. They can't get testimonials. They can't get somebody to speak to how much help they got. And if you remember, Chris Liddy got up and spoke for Fairfield Counseling Services last year. and did a great job of explaining how they're involved in our police response plan and treating the mental health component of that. So I think that for me it was extremely valuable to sit down with each group, literally look for the overlap, find out what they do, and make sure that that's something that's worthwhile to our residents. So I don't see a formula mix on this. This is not, we're giving money to American Heart Association, American Cancer Society, not that they're not good. I don't mean to say that. But those are formulas. We can give 1%, 0.5%. When we've talked about in the past of cutting all these across the board, I'm like, you can't do that. I mean, you can, but they're providing different services to people. You need to look at the people they're helping. So I think that's what I'm trying to get back to, is organize them in different groups, make the labeling better than not-for-profit, because that doesn't say anything about what they do and how they service our town, and then come up with a program that basically targets, I think the expression we've used in the past is accountability, targets what their goals are and what their projections are for each year, then set up a simple system so they can come back and report to us how they did. We don't want to spend hours talking over a group that we invest $3,000 in.
Thank you. Further questions? Yes. Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, Lauren. You have to speak into it.
I think you have to turn it on. There you are.
Lauren O'Brien, District 5. As a town, do we have an established criteria that we follow for vetting 501c3s, not-for-profit, nonprofits, or is it a subjective decision that's made?
At this point, there's not a formal process beyond they would apply to the first selectman, and the first selectman would determine whether to include them in the budget and why or not.
Given the depth and breadth and large disparity between these type of organizations, I would like to see us establish a clear and concrete vetting process in the interest of the town.
Yep, certainly, and yes.
Thank you. Further questions? Yes, Howard?
Just a quick question. On the Sullivan-McKinney elder housing, that one jumped almost twice. It's last year's allocation, previous years. Was there a reason for that?
Yes, there was.
Okay.
Oh.
Can you share?
First of all, it's $11,000. So yes, it jumped a
not
lot,
a
but it's a
large
small
amount,
number. So
right.
if you're making any difference in it, it's going to jump a lot. They're making improvements to the interior elevators to provide for improved ADA compatibility. So I'm looking at that as kind of a one-time expense. So that's not a trend going up. That's just up and then down once they've got. Think of that as help with a capital expenditure.
Okay, thanks. And then the nonprofits here that sound like they have regional applications, or they involve various towns and us working cooperatively.
Mm-hmm.
Are they all discretely different? Because it is confusing sometimes to read about the regional ones. And are they mandated, or are we, it looks like in some cases we are obliged by a previous commitment?
I think there's only one in here that is what I'm going to say legally mandated, and that's the GBRC.
Oh.
And our payment there is a formula-based. It's based on so much per head in going through. The others are, I believe, at our discretion in terms of what services we want to provide those of our residents that need it the most.
So the GBRC is actually a contract per person?
No, it's a government. It's a quasi-governmental organization. It's a regional planning council, and every town in Connecticut belongs to their own version of GBRC. GBRC here, it's Southwestern Regional. When you move to Westport through Greenwich, it's another one in Ridgefield, Danbury. There's another one in the Valley, another one up by Waterbury, and if you get to the rest part of the state, there are different ones there.
Thank you. Representative Hurley?
But while the mic is being passed, the GBRC is how we get money. When we got $1.2 million in a grant from the federal government to do sidewalks and other improvements over in the Kings Highway area, that was through the GBRC. We've got another $1 million. We're looking at having them help apply, get, and manage for us. So, as well as they're helping us develop the GIS, a regional hazard mitigation plan for our flooding area and stuff. So there's a lot of value coming back in that group.
Michael Hurley, District 1. Obviously, it's been a long road over the past 2 years on the nonprofits and how this town has, been trying to think through the best way to fund them, categorize and think about them.
Yeah, I think the committee said they actually worked for 4 years when they were before you, from 2010 till now.
Okay, 4 years, but I would say in particular the past 2 years. And I think your, idea of potentially moving Pequot out of the nonprofits into the library is, probably a pretty good one to consider. My question is, does the nonprofit committee from the Board of Selectmen still exist?
We haven't officially disbanded them yet, but their mission was to give us a report. They did, and I'm not sure if we will renew that charge, or I think it's time for the Board of Selectmen to sit down and discuss this, certainly based on the committee recommendations and what I went through in the past year with each of these groups. I've got some thoughts in terms of how I think this should be organized so that we can evaluate it and see what the benefits are to our town and the residents in our town, so we know that our money is being well spent.
Okay, I think that's a good idea. Take a hard look at the direction you're headed. If the committee is reformed, I just ask that you consider, I think it would probably benefit, the town would benefit with some new, fresh blood on that committee.
Thank you. Further questions? We may now address the items on the 7:30 to 8:15 section, which consist of contingency, pension, retiree medical, risk management, and the internal service fund. So, Mike, will you be presenting on that? Or will Bob?
I'm going to turn this section over to our CFO.
Thank you.
Before we get into that, a couple of comments on the earlier, very quickly. When you look at the year-over-year budget information, year-to-date budget expenditures that's going online tomorrow, remember that there's a 2-month lag between date of service and date of payment. So if you look, for example, at the report tomorrow, so if it's February 28th, that's not 2/3 of a year, that's really only half a year. So when you do your extrapolations, take that into consideration.
Thank you.
The second comment, we talked about revenue. The revenue is in the budget book, starts on page 48. It's basically categorized by 3 criteria of determination. The grants are primarily they're state grants. They're per the state budget, the governor's budget. Then there's contracted items, leases, other contracted revenue sources. Those are per the contract. They tie back to individual contracts, individual leases, individual documents. And the remainder are based upon a 3-year average, with the exception where the department head has some information that available that they know there's going to be a change or some impact on that 3-year average. So that's how the revenues have been determined. Okay, with that, those clarifications, I'm ready to move forward with respect to any questions you have on.
Any follow-up questions by members of the RTM? No? Proceed, please.
So I guess I'm just here for questions for I have no contingency. I guess I could have a little bit of report. Contingency is this year's contingency budget has basically 4 items in it. There's the normal contingency for expenditures which may come up, which are unidentified, unthought of, and then there's the contingency part for allowance for negotiated contracts, which is normally handled, not normally is handled in executive session because that's related a lot to labor contracts, other negotiated contracts. There's 2 other items in the contingency budget this year. There's $425,000 that was transferred from the assessor's office to contingency, while there's some clarification over when and how how much of that to spend. And then there's also a $30,000 amount that was transferred from the registrar's office to contingency because of the uncertainty of whether or not there'd be primaries. So the assessor portion of that will definitely be spent. The assessor's portion...
That is the
excuse me,
$425,000?
$425,000. The registrar's portion will be spent if there are primaries. Many people believe there are primaries. And then the remaining third is, was looked at closely and scrutinized by the Board of Finance in executive session, and they they reduced that by $286,000.
Yes, Ed. I'm sorry. What is the balance today?
After adjustments.
Balance after adjustments. I was looking to Linda because she normally gets these numbers faster than I do. Hold on, so I haven't separated my papers. $2,482,000. Thank you, Linda.
Further questions, Mr. Bateson?
Not at this time.
Thank you. Any further questions from members of the RTM? Thank you. The pension, do you want to address the pension aspect of the presentation?
The pension plan and the OPEB plan are in the budget at 100% of the actuarially required contribution. I think it's $10,060,000 for the pension and about $10 million for the OPEB as well. Those are 100% funded to the level of the ARC determined and calculated by the actuaries. The pension plan evaluation is done annually. The OPEB evaluation is done biannually, every other year. There has been, Representative McCarthy was talking earlier about the $100 million increase in expenditures over the last X number of years. 20 million of that is from zero budgets for OPEB and pension to today's budget of $20 million combined for those two.
So do you foresee us headed in that same positive direction in funding OPEB? Now that we're at the 100% of the ARC, assuming we meet our assumptions, those expenditure requirements should level off. So if you look today at what's projected for 16, 17, and 18 fiscal years, it's approximately the same as what's projected for this current budget you're looking at, the 15 budget. Retiree medical, any?
Retiree medical, that's OPEB, that's the same.
And risk management, internal service fund?
Risk management is general liability expenditures. That number is budgeted. A sit-down with the town attorney, the human resources manager, and the KERMA representative to try to get a sense of what kind of liabilities we have out there. So we take the known risks, quantify the known risks, and then we also look at kind of what the unknown risk produces over time and factor that in, and that's the $545,000 number that's in the budget. The internal service fund, other than that, is it's basically workers' comp, town medical, and Board of Ed medical. The workers' comp has leveled off. That number's in there, budgeted at 100% of expected costs. The town medical has been leveling off, been decent experience. I'm sure you're all up to date on all the conversation and the information that's come out about the Board of Ed, where they had several years of positive experience that regressed to the mean, and they had anticipated using about $600,000 of their excess reserve for this fiscal year. That's ended up to be about $1.4 million, actually. carried forward, and this is with information, experience information through February, and then carried forward, well, let me back up. At the end of this year, it's anticipated to have a little bit of excess reserve, like about $100,000. But if given their current budget, that will be utilized completely in the year that we're budgeting here, fiscal year 2015, and the decision of the Board of Finance was to correct that over time, and they placed $500,000 extra contribution into the Internal Service Fund to help manage the fund balance of the entire Internal Service Fund.
Yes, Mr. Donovan.
Thanks. Nothing's coming out. I'm just trying to figure out this thing with like pensions versus 401A. And so I'm looking on page 328, and it looks like we have a little over $10 million expense in pension and about $40,000 in 401A. So would it be accurate to say, as far as the effectiveness of defined contribution versus defined benefit, it's less than 1% in terms of participation, effectively from a cost standpoint for 2015?
Yeah, if that's how the number calculates, I haven't calculated. There's actually, I gave it, which I'd be happy to share, a presentation to this body, I don't know, maybe a year ago, that kind of explained how 401As and defined benefit plans, defined contribution plans work. The bottom line with going to a defined contribution plan is actually in the early years you spend more money. So this is not a short-term savings. It might not even be a long-term savings. But what it is, it reduces the variability and the risk and transfers the market risk, if you will, from the town to the town employees.
Get it. And I'm new, so thank you, and I look forward to maybe getting more of that offline. But still, as you look at it, I mean, 5 of 7 unions, but the reality is it's less than 1%.
Well, that's because it's only new people.
Absolutely, and that was the
Right.
point I was making before,
Right.
where the response was kind of it's 5 of 7 unions. This is a long-term thing, and when you start to look at how we manage this budget longer term at lower rates, it ain't going to come from there, at least short term.
Correct.
Thank you.
Good observation.
Representative Bateson.
Thank you. Ed Bateson, District 3. Quick thing, this is going to go to Linda Gardner. Linda, on page 327, the PMA workman's comp, I see all the numbers rolling up into the budget except for the $240,000 for total estimated fixed costs. Where does that roll up into the budget? Yeah, the page is 327, the PMA estimate. I see where the 2.4 million, the 725 go. I can't find the 240,500. Is that? So
Those are, the administration costs are budgeted in the Human Resources Department.
So it's buried in, I didn't see that number in a line item, so I'm assuming it's rolled up with other numbers.
Yes.
Okay.
Probably fees and professional services.
Okay, some clarification on what happened with the Internal Service Fund during the budget process. The Board of Selectmen, it looks like they decreased by $250,000. Is that correct, Mike? There was an adjustment made for $250,000 to the Internal Service Fund.
You said Mike, but I assume you meant me.
Mike or Bob,
Yeah,
whoever can
yeah,
answer.
okay, yeah. The February experience for the town healthcare versus the prior calculation date showed a positive change of $250,000. That $250,000, the Board of Finance then reduced the budget by that $250,000 to bring the healthcare budget in line with the most current information available.
Okay, that's coming from that memo the email you had sent around the update, right, for the February numbers.
Yes.
I guess what's confusing me is the town side did better, but the education side from your email seemed to do worse.
Correct statement.
So why would we book the $250,000 and take the benefit? And then, you know, I see later on in the process, the Board of Finance added 500,000. So it's net, we've only improved 250, am I correct?
Correct. The Board of Finance looks at the individual components of the internal service fund separately. So you have the workers' comp is one column, the health care for the Board of Ed is a second, health care for the town is a third, and then your general liability and risk management is a fourth.
Okay, in the Board of Finance's discussion, I was a little concerned. They book their entry to their supplemental contribution line, but their adjustment was directed towards internal service fund healthcare, right?
I'm going to let Mr. Tetral actually explain that.
We had a line item budget 2 years ago where we put $2 million into the workers'
Correct.
comp. When they were this was a two-step process. The Board of Selectmen took $500,000 from reserves that were planned to
The
be
bond
used
amortization.
in fiscal 16, 2 years from now. We moved that into the current year, or into the fiscal 15. And we put it in the Board of Ed healthcare line, because that's where we had the gap. We're down about $1.5 million is what we're trying to make up there. Because over the course of fiscal 15, the Board of Ed's going to draw down their reserves down to roughly zero by June 30th, 2015. So we wanted to address that. So we moved the $500,000 there. The Board of Finance felt it was better keeping it in the internal service fund, but moving it from there to the general liability workers' comp silo, if you will.
But it is related to healthcare costs, not workman's comp, correct?
No. We're taking money that we're going to spend on debt service, so it's fungible. We can spend it on anything. We were going to put it in the Board of Ed issue, and then it would have been related to healthcare costs. They moved it over to the general liability workers' comp. Because the internal service fund is looked at as a whole with those three numbers added up, from the outside, you don't care what it is. It improves the balance sheet. From the inside, they wanted to see the Board of Ed go back and address over the next few years that $1.5 million shortfall in their health and court line. We need to address the workers' comp line, because if you look at the internal service fund, the workers' comp general liability line has a minus $6 million accrual value going forward. So that's the one big negative we had. The town is now positive, and if you look at the medical, the town was negative a few years ago. It's now positive. The Board of Ed was positive a few years ago. It's now getting projected to be close to zero at the end of this year.
Given all these numbers that we've taken into account up to this date, to me it looks like going from 13 to 15, the fund is improving, correct?
Dramatically. We were negative $7 million for the fund as a total back 3 or 4 years ago. So we have progressively brought that down. Yeah. And we're now at the end of where? At the end of 14, we're projected to be at $2.3 million negative. So that's, from a rating agency standpoint, that's a big winner.
Okay, good. And how about, I noticed last year there was significant discussion on workman's comp. This year I didn't hear much. Does that mean that that issue has been addressed or somewhat stabilized?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you.
What I said earlier is we set up safety committees throughout the town and Board of Ed. We've seen that pay off. The workers' comp expense numbers starting to go down. I don't mean to say we've solved it. That's not what I'm saying.
No, but there was hours on this discussion last year.
It was doing this. We've now kind of turned the corner and started to bring that down. Okay.
When do you expect, maybe to Mr. Mayor, when do you expect to get Aon February numbers? I'm sorry, March.
March numbers will be available sometime between the 15th and 20th
of April. Okay, Mr. Tetro, as soon as you get those, can you get those to us also? And one other follow-up, throughout the discussions on the internal service fund, I want to make sure that the Board of Education right now, in this budget, we are at 1 times IBNR, and the trend factor is now matching the towns, correct? We're at 1 town-wide trend factor for medical.
That is correct. The year-end IBNR for the Board of Ed is
For
project-
15.
For 14
14.
is projected to be approximately equal to 1.
So, okay, so what we
Okay.
currently have in the budget, you've,
The projected at June 30th this year, 2014, the final result, if everything, if all the activity occurs as it is currently projected, the IBNR will be at a times 1.0
for the Board of Ed,
for the Board of Ed.
and they're using the same trend factor
And they're-
now as the
And they're now
town.
using the same trend factor, which is 8.6.
And that's the one recommended by Aon.
That's the one recommended by Aon, yes, sir.
Great, thank you.
Further questions? Yes. Representative Way.
In connection with the heart and hypertension, I know that has been tied to a state mandate in connection with that, or a state law. We're no longer adding people to that funding, correct? And I think that it's been repealed or, kept in a state where there is no longer additions coming into that. So
No,
how,
the heart and hypertension is a fund that is in the general fund, excuse me, it's an expenditure that's in the general fund. It's not in the internal service fund. It is based primarily on public safety personnel.
right?
And there was a state act that basically said if you were a public safety, i.e. police or fire person with any kind of cardiac issue, you were automatically identified as heart and hypertension due to work.
Exactly. I'm
and you
very
went in.
familiar with that.
So that particular act has been I don't wanna say
Rescinded?
overturned, rescinded, good word.
Okay, good.
But you still could have a fireman or a policeman with cardiac problems that could be associated with their employment, and so they would become part of that fund.
Right, but we're not seeing as many people being added to it as we did in the past,
Correct
correct?
statement.
And so do we kind of see this fund being diminished over the years, hopefully?
Well, yes, hopefully, yes.
Thank you.
Mr. McKenzie?
Bob, thanks for being here. More a comment than a question. Ridgefield's been in the news lately for having negotiated a 401A for fire and police. And I know you can't comment on what we're doing in that area, but that was an important step. So now all their unions are on 401A. In addition, they've made a big step in the fact that once someone reaches the age of 65, the town is no longer responsible for any part of their medical. It's finished. Up until that time, if they retire before age 65, there's heavy participation by employees in whatever medical plan they offer. They also don't have insurance beyond the time an employee works for the town.
You mean life insurance?
Life insurance. Thank you. Yeah, no life insurance. So I think they've done some good things, and the only thing I would ask, and by the way, they got all this accomplished with no binding arbitration, so the only thing I would ask is that we consider some of the things that they may have done in terms of our own union negotiations and try and move as quickly as possible in that direction. Thank you.
Thank you. I think those are positive comments. Thank you.
Mr. Bateson, then Mr. Timniak.
Thank you. Ed Bates in District 3. Sorry, I want to follow up on contingency. I can't let this go. Maybe to Mr. Mayor, I look at the budget, fiscal 11, 12, 13, I see nothing. Fiscal 14, 2.1 million. Now I'm at 2.4. And I really don't know what's in the number. and I'm being asked to approve it. Maybe through you to the first selectman, I think it's about time the RTM got involved in this process, and maybe we can set up something where the first selectman or Mr. Mayor can go into executive session with the finance committee, the RTM. Somebody has to know what's going into this number, because it's almost 1% of the budget, and I understand that there's a sensitivity nature to this, but like anything in government, there's, you know, you have committees in Washington. There has to be some sort of accountability. I understand. I'm trying to respect the privacy of these numbers and the sensitive nature of it, but it's 1%, and I don't know what's in it.
It has been covered with the Board of Finance, so in terms of accountability and disclosure, that's all happened at an executive session with
Granted, and you went in, I'm sorry, I didn't recognize that. You do go into executive session with the Board of Finance, and I do understand that. But I'm signing the budget. I'm approving the budget. I don't know what's in there. Maybe if it was $50,000, I wouldn't say anything. But, you know, now, last year, 2.1, 2.4. Personally, I want to cut it because I don't know what's in it, but I'm going to get yelled at. So somebody's got to start talking here and let us know what's in this number. So I'm asking that before we go to budget, at least go to one committee, go into executive session. I think might be appropriate for finance, but you have to start telling us what's in these numbers.
Yep. Let me talk to the moderator offline. But if we go with only one committee, that means everybody else is signing off on that number, Ed. If you weren't in that committee, you'd be signing off on it without knowing that.
Mike,
so what you're telling me is you just don't trust the Board of Finance and the Board of Selectmen.
But I'm approving a budget, and I get,
Yeah.
I'm not saying I don't trust the, okay,
Well, you
I don't
kind of
trust
are.
anybody.
That's exactly.
I don't trust anybody. Let's go with that.
I think I heard that quote.
Yeah. So I don't, you're right, and that's why I really didn't want to bring this up tonight, but it's bothering me. I'm trying to let this go, but I'm sorry, Mike, I can't. It's $2.4 million. And the only number I know, two numbers, registrars for $38,000 and the assessors for $425. Somebody asked me what's in there. I don't know. Labor contracts. Okay, how many? I just, maybe I'm asking, maybe talk to the moderator, set something up. Maybe we can understand, but really, it's almost 1% of the budget. And, you know, I want to cut it, but I'm going to get yelled at.
Further questions? Yes, Mr. Timniak.
While he's faking his mic, let me get some clarification, because there were a lot of internal service fund numbers thrown out. As we know, that fund balance was negative $5-6 million a few years ago. The fund balance is projected, the fund balance at July 1, 13 was $3,147,000. Projection for June 30, 14 is $2,362,000, so they got improvement of $784,000. And then going into 15, it reverses itself with the impact of the negative budgeting for health care on the Board of Ed side, offset somewhat by the $500,000 supplement put in the workers' comp side. So it goes from the 2.4 million approximately to 3.7 million.
All right. I got two questions. One on health. Chris Timniak, District 9. Two questions. The first one's on health, the health plan and retirees benefits. My question is, has there been an audit done recently or lately within the last year or two by our insurance carrier to make sure that all of our retirees are receiving the benefits they deserve accurately?
Yes.
Okay, when was that done?
That was done about 18 months ago.
Okay, was everybody receiving the benefits accurately, or was there an adjustment?
Yeah, there was everything was found to be running quite well.
Okay. And has the same thing been done for our current employees? Because I know that's a changing number every year. When was the last time that was done?
I think for as far as current employees, as far as enrollment and benefits, the same time.
Okay. All right. And was that accurately done? And the reason why I ask is because a lot of times family situations change, whether divorce, remarry.
Right, no, I'm aware, yes.
So when someone reaches 65 or some kid falls out and is no longer in the household, all of that is being done correctly? We're not paying for people who we shouldn't be paying for?
We are doing our very best to not pay for people we shouldn't be paying for.
Okay. Okay, so that was done 18 months ago.
That's, yeah, I think it's about then. Since I've been here, and I've only been here for 2 years, so.
All right, and my other question, I guess, was answered on the over 65 question. Are we fully paying for retirees over 65 currently, if they receive the health plan? Or does that get rolled into a Medicare or Medicaid?
They get, well, over 65, they get rolled into Medicare. The town has in the past was paying, there was no retiree participation, but I think there's some. Yeah, there's been a lot. I think there's currently some retiree participation, but I can't speak directly to like which union, which subset.
I do know that there's a lot of municipalities in the state who end up overpaying in that situation just because either paperwork's not done to unenroll or to switch at the time. So I wanted to make sure that was, and that number adds up pretty quickly too.
Right. Yeah, and it's they go from when they turn 65. We make sure that they go from the current plan to a Medicare carve-out kind
Is that
of situation.
the town which does that or our insurance carrier which does that?
Well, it's done administratively, a combination, I would say.
Okay, and the last time that was done 18 months ago?
No, you talked about an audit.
Right.
That's done every time somebody turns 65.
See, okay, so we do that at open enrollment time, is what
Yes.
you're saying. All right, thank you.
Further questions? Seeing none. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I believe we've now covered the miscellaneous items on the schedule tonight. So seeing that there's no further questions of Mr. Mayor at this time, let's go to conservation.
And thank you all.
Thank you.
Just to fill everybody in, Tom Stanky is out with a back issue at the moment, so that Annette Jacobson will be filling in tonight in his stead.
Thank you, Annette. What page is your budget?
I believe it's page 100.
Page 100?
Or around there. Let's see.
Thank you.
Or that's the end of it.
I'm sorry?
I believe 100 is the end of the budget. 95.
100, yes, thank you.
95. And if I don't know the answers, then I'll try and get the answers as quickly as I can.
Beginning on page 95, thank you. Would you like to just give us a quick overview of your...
Okay. We have the 5 department programs. We do general conservation, marsh restoration, open space where we manage 1,200 acres of natural areas that are not parks. We do the inland wetlands program, which is regulatory for permits, and the shellfish program, which is a separate budget for shellfish. We've seen some turnaround in the economy. We start to see through permitting, the economy is improving. We're asking for some people, but that has not been funded, so you can only, can't add any money to the budget, so that's not relevant here. Very bare bones from our perspective.
Have you lost any staff in the last year?
Not in the last year. We lost staff at the beginning of the recession, and that has not been...
Was that one full-time staff member?
Yes, it was our full-time wetlands compliance officer and our full-time secretary position, and we've been, the Wetlands Compliance Officer duties were given to our full-time open space manager. And we have a part-time secretary instead of the full-time secretary. That position was shared with another department. So we've been doing that since December 2008.
Are they, RTM members have any questions of Ms. Jacobson? Yes, Mr. Bateson. Sorry.
Thank you, Ed Bateson, District 3. Annette, Wetlands Compliance Officer, you asked, it hasn't been filled. Who is serving as Wetlands Compliance Officer right now?
Our open space manager, Ed Jones, the open space manager position has been a full-time position since 1971. Ed Jones is the full-time open space manager, and he's assumed also some responsibilities of the Wetlands Compliance Officer.
And he did that last year, too?
Yes.
Okay. Another quick question. When I go to Town Hall and I fill out a permit application, I give you guys that check. What's that called? The bond?
Well, there's application fees, and then there can be a performance bond.
Yeah, the performance
also.
bond. I know that was an issue for the past several years of going through backlogs and trying to get that money back to bond people that had bond remittance. How's that project going? Have we gotten that down?
On certificates of wetlands conformance, we are pretty much up to date. On certificates of wetlands conformance performance bonds, there was extra effort put into that, and we are right on target on certificates.
Okay. Mike, I see you behind her.
I just wanted to point out that, again, this is something, thank you for bringing it up. It's one area that really doesn't get a whole lot of spotlight on it. Conservation put together a program over 6 months to drop that from what had been, I think,
it was like 800,000. It was a lot, right?
Huge, down to 7 months, then get it down under 2 months, and then with a goal of getting it down under 30 days. So
okay, so you've been watching that too. Are you happy with the progress, and that number is coming down?
They've made tremendous progress to that. So when you look at improving service levels, conservation is one of the big areas we've done that in.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Further questions? I'm sorry, Laura. Yes, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Okay, great, thank you. Can you just describe for me briefly or explain what is in the fees and professional services? Simply because, looking at the history, it's just, went from 15 to 30 to 0 to a proposed budget of 43 down to 26. What is in there that is so volatile or that keeps getting put in and pulled out?
What line item is that?
That is line item 53,200, fees and professional services on page 96.
Okay.
In 2011, it was about 15,000.
I believe that is a lot of the surveying that we do of our open space areas. We are trying to survey and mark different open space areas of different sizes that we've acquired lands of different at different times, and they're so that's one of the variable pieces of that, and so that can range when there's smaller pieces of property and larger pieces of property, and we get different bids on that. So that's one of the large items that varies a lot over the years.
What was proposed that isn't going to happen, just from the 43,000 to the 26,000? I'm just trying to understand that.
Can you just give me 1 second, because this is very small.
I can appreciate that.
Okay. This is open space and survey and monumentation of open space properties by private surveyor, environmental assessment, soil testing, and conditions assessment, structural stabilization for the Hoydens Hill Open Space Barn, and reappropriation of funds from a Connecticut historic grant should allow the completion of the work this year. Then there's also inland wetland soil scientist mapping, contracted secretarial services for absences, soil and water sampling lab testing for contamination, also salt marsh, mosquito management control, wildlife habitat and contaminated sediment disposal. Sorry, it's quite small.
Does that answer your question?
Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Further questions? Yes, Julie.
Thanks. Julie Gottlieb, District 6. To follow up on Representative Devlin's question, so have we tracked in past years fairly accurately? It seems like there's a lot of things if you're depending on land acquisition or things that get moved over or those sorts of things. How do you predict what you're going, how do you budget for that?
The areas that we're surveying, I know the one that's undergoing surveying right now is Brett Woods. That's not a new area. This is long-standing area that we're surveying. This is not a new area that we're acquiring.
So it's things that are on a schedule?
Yes. We're focusing on our larger areas that we've had for many years that we've acquired in pieces. This is not a new acquisition. We had never actually had surveys of these properties that we've acquired over the past 30 or 40 years.
Got it. Great. Thanks.
Yes, Lauren.
Lauren O'Brien, District 5. Question, any of this testing, is it in regards to new construction? And if so, is there any way to pass those costs on to builders and developers?
Okay. The type of soil testing that we were doing would only be on town property, not on private property. Anything that was proposed for development on private property would be paid for and done by private developers or private interests. The soil testing that we're talking about would be investigations on something that the town owns or that we have an interest in.
Thank you.
Further questions? Yes, I'm sorry. Go ahead, John.
Check. 1, 2, 3. Thank you, Jay. Jay Walk, District 6. Hi. Thank you for all your work that you do for our town. I have a quick question. On page 100, I see that the Board of Finance has removed in a vote one of your cars that you requested on the 2014 Ford Escape. My question is, now what are you guys going to do?
Oh, well, we use a lot of
Besides
duct
using a
tape.
bicycle.
Well, what we usually do is we try and recycle vehicles from other departments. We look to the fire department and things in the past. When we can, we try and get a used vehicle from another department. So or we try and keep repairing vehicles that we have now.
So the one that was going to replace this vehicle that you had obviously is not working, or?
They break down a lot with 140,000 miles, but we will keep trying to use it.
Okay, so you put a request in for another vehicle to replace this, so you'll be all right for now.
We will
Kicking the
make do.
can down the road, basically. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Jay. Yes.
Quick question. Lauren O'Brien, District 5. Quick question. I know we're trying to save money by not buying vehicles. You say they break down a lot. Is that tracked? How often they break down?
I can check. This would be the open space manager's vehicle. I don't know, we're fairly busy. I don't know if he keeps a log of exactly how often it goes in. Maybe the Public Works Garage keeps a log of that. I can check on that.
I'm just concerned that we're wasting time with vehicles down if they're old and decrepit, and maybe not buying them is not in the best interest of the town, depending on the vehicle and the department.
Thank
Thanks.
you. Thank you. If no further questions, thank you, Annette. Next, Attorney Stanton Lesser on Legal Services. Welcome.
Good evening, all. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Are we being charged tonight for your presence?
Yes.
For the record.
And I was here at 8:15 like I was supposed to.
You can start.
Thank you. My budget request this year was $550,000. The Board of Selectmen, Board of Finance cut it to $500,000, so that's what we're requesting. My main budget drivers for the past couple of years have been tax...
I'm sorry, for the record, what page?
It's 103, I think.
On page 213?
103.
103, thank you.
103, 104.
103, thank you.
My primary budget drivers for the past couple of years have been tax appeals and then the labor negotiations. We've reduced the amount that we've asked for tax appeals because while we started out with over 200 of them right after the reval, most of them are gone. There's just a few left. The ones that are left may have to be tried, so we've reduced that. We've increased a little bit the request for labor negotiations because there's still a few unions that we're negotiating with, and that's really where we come to. But the primary decrease in the budget is from the tax appeals.
Questions of Attorney Lesser? Yes, Mr. Bateson.
Yes. Thank you, Ed Bateson, District 3. How you doing, Stan?
Good. Good, thanks.
Quick thing. I see we're asking for 500. That didn't get touched by anyone, right? It's at 500 still?
As far as I know.
Right, Mike? I don't think it's been touched either,
No,
correct?
It wasn't reduced further.
Okay.
It was reduced from an initial request of 550 down to 550.
That was by you, though, right?
Yes.
Okay. I see I got this document from the town website where we do the 12-month projected amount, and it rolls out to $460,000 in our current year. And, you know, I for one, see a little room to spare in this budget for the simple fact that, you know, like you said, tax appeals are going down. And I know it's been extremely active litigation-wise over the past 5 years. I just wonder, you know, do you really think 500 is the accurate number, or is there excess in there?
You know, with litigation, it's hard to plan. We've increased, as you can see, we increased by about 50% the amount that, from what we're projecting to spend this year for the labor negotiations, but we reduced by, you know, from 112 down to 40,000 for tax appeals. So, I mean, I think it's a pretty close budget. Can I tell you that it's exact? No. I mean, we never know. We get lawsuits, you know, every now and again, and you really can't predict when they're coming or how much they're going to cost to defend.
Okay, thank you for that.
Any further questions of Attorney Lesser? Tom? Yes. Yes, Pam.
Actually, this might be for the first selectman, but related to legal services. Are you handling all of our legal work, or is some of that handed off to Eileen Kennelly still?
Eileen Kennelly really isn't doing any legal work. I sometimes have questions of her because she handled it in the past, but she is not a town attorney. She's the risk manager, so she is not.
So legal questions don't go through her anymore?
I may ask her questions, but no, it's not.
It's more for history?
Yeah.
Yep. And then just to clarify, the Stan has a number of attorneys based on the expertise, be it a specific claim. Certainly
Correct.
labor is going through somebody else.
Right.
We also have some employee issues that come up that will go through another firm, so that there's about 10 or 12 different attorneys or firms that are used throughout the time.
Right, I understand that. Thank you. Thank you.
Further questions? Michael?
Yeah, Michael Hurley, District 1. Just a quick question, and I think it might be answered by First Selectman Tetro. If the legal budget goes over, do you have to go to contingency for that, or what is the procedure?
Yes.
And if you go to contingency, am I correct that the Board of Finance has to approve the monies first?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Further questions? Saying none, thank you, Stan.
Thank you all.
Next, Community and Economic Development, Mr. Barnhart. Good evening, Mark.
Good evening. I believe my budget is on page 114. Very little change over the prior year. I'd be happy to answer your questions this evening.
Just a quick overview.
Okay.
You see any increases, substantial increases in your budget, or has it basically maintained the same?
It's pretty much stayed the same. The one area that's a little, that I want to comment on is the fees and professional services line. I think when I had first put the budget together, I had proposed a slight reduction in that. That was really a miscommunication between myself and the First Selectman. Obviously, we're in the 375th anniversary year. The intent was to include funding for 375th anniversary celebration events in that line. And so that decision on my part was a bit premature, since we're in the midst of that celebration. Our intent, regardless of what we've proposed to appropriate here, is to seek sponsorships or funding from external sources to pay for those events to the extent possible. But the idea was to at least have an appropriation authority by which we can then seed some of those activities during the course of the year. So,
If I may ask a question, the other evening, many of us attended a seminar on affordable housing at the Education Center.
Yes.
And there was a presenter who gave the presentation that night. And I believe he's under contract with the town to...
Yes, he is.
And what is the amount of that contract, if I may ask you? And this is a study relative to where we perhaps should be with respect to affordable housing?
As you recall, or may recall, the Board of Selectmen tasked the Affordable Housing Committee with updating the town's affordable housing plan, which was written in 1988. We sought the Board of Selectmen, Planning and Zoning and RTM authorization to seek grant funding for that effort to help facilitate that work, and we were successful in securing a $20,000 grant from the Department of Housing, which we then used for the purpose of retaining a planning consultant, Planometrics, to assist the Affordable Housing Committee in my department with actually writing the plan. So the workshop is part of a larger outreach effort to try to engage the community and think about ways in which we can meet our housing needs and really be more proactive in terms of developing a strategy so that we're not as defensive.
Thank you. Yes, Representative Way. It's on. It's on.
There it is. It's on now. Carol Way, District 5. Mark, in connection with the life insurance, were there new people that came on board that boosted it to that number, or just kind of curious, 133% increase?
I honestly don't know. I didn't actually prepare that number. Can somebody help me out here?
That's the lines, the higher level lines on each budget are prepared by the finance department, so a department head like Mark doesn't have any say in life insurance lines.
Okay.
So it's best if Ms. Gardner answer that.
Thank you.
Further questions? Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, go ahead, please. No. We invite you to.
Please.
In the prior year, we had budgeted
incorrectly for department heads. And so I made an adjustment. Because there's only 1.75 employees in this department, it's an exaggerated increase. But you'll see a slight increase in every department which that has a department head.
That makes sense.
Okay.
Thanks for the explanation. Yes, Mr. Bateson?
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Ed Bateson, District 3, Mr. Barnhart. The person you have in there, the .75, is that the other piece is picked up by the grant we approve every year?
It's actually picked up through the fees for downtown employee parking. She administers the downtown employee parking program for us. The other individual that you're referring to is completely funded through the grant, and all of her
100%
activities.
funded.
100% funded through the grant.
And this one, the .75, where's the .25 come from?
The .25 comes from the downtown employee parking program. So she administers that program on behalf of the town, provides employee parking for downtown businesses and their employees.
That one's not ringing a bell. Is that in our budget somewhere, or is it in another department?
I don't know if it's in your budget book here, but it's a special fund. It is in your audit report.
In the audit report?
Yes.
Okay, great, thanks.
Any further questions? Yes, Mary.
Hello.
Hi, Mark. If you would, please, address economic development.
Sure.
The portion of the budget that many of us get emails that say, what are we doing to attract and secure more businesses in town? Thank you.
We have economic development is pretty much me. The person devoted full time to that mission. I have three primary focal areas. One is supporting our local business community, supporting our local business base through various initiatives and programs. Those include some of the joint promotional and marketing programs we've done with particularly with our retail and mercantile base, such as Shop and Stroll and Restaurant Week and things of that nature. They're very popular. They tend to be very labor intensive. We've partnered with the Chamber of Commerce to roll those out. But it also includes things like just general business advocacy and support, helping them through regulatory process, technical assistance, identifying funding. We don't necessarily provide a lot of funding ourselves directly to support business development, but we can access funding from other sources through our partners at both the state and regional levels, through UI, for example. I would term it general ombudsman services. So again, if a business has a problem, we want to try to solve that problem for them. So it kind of falls into that category. The second primary area is growing new or emerging companies. And we've done that through a number of different programs and initiatives. Again, this past year we created a new business incubator in collaboration with Cleveland Properties and Fairfield University. The idea was to identify and grow new companies that would eventually grow bigger and stay here within our community and create employment. We have a microenterprise program that's funded through the Community Development Block Grant, so we can provide direct capital infusion to some of these small businesses. We also get involved with things like helping them with a business plan development. One of the tools that we have is we have access to very site-specific marketing data, so we can perform market analysis for them on a specific location and help them, again, craft a business plan to, again, secure financing for their business. And then the last thing would be, and certainly not least, is spurring new investment in the area. So we routinely meet with property owners, commercial brokers, developers, those interested in investing in our community. We'll try to provide them with site location assistance. One of the tools we have is our site finder, if you will. It's a list of all commercial space in town, either for sale or for rent. It's hosted on the town's website, so it's meant to provide like a one-stop shop for people looking for space, and our idea is just simply to connect them with those that have space available. We provide that as a free service to the general business community. And obviously, part of that is also looking at just general marketing of the community. we're not able to, with the staff resources or resources that we have, go out and go to a lot of trade shows out of state or things like that, but we do work with our regional partners. UI has done site finder, site location consultants coming into the area, and we'll put together a presentation for them. Those are basically consultants that are looking to locate larger corporate companies into the area, so they may not be familiar with Connecticut or Fairfield County, so we want to make sure that we provide information to them. And again, the idea is to try to identify and leverage capital as best we can.
Mike, do you want to add to that?
Just kind of two comments to help set the stage here. When we talk about more commercial development in town, you know, that's brought up a lot. Our vacancy rate is 5 to 8%. Okay, 5 to 8%. If we want new businesses in town, we have to build more buildings. We're competing against Norwalk, runs about 20-25% vacancy rate. We're competing with Stanford, running about 20-25% there. So, you know, from a standpoint of getting more commercial tax dollars into Fairfield, we have to build more buildings to do that. That's all. And then from a larger standpoint, Mark has done a great job. In addition to what Mark is doing here in the network he's doing, and we have one of the smallest economic development offices in the area. So Mark is amazingly productive in terms of putting that together and using his dollars very wisely. But we've also met with groups like the German American Chamber of Commerce that brought a number of German businesses over here to look at the greater Bridgeport area, and under the auspices of the greater Bridgeport Regional Planning Council in terms of working with them to look at that. So we're working on that development at several levels.
Excuse me, Michael, if you don't mind, Mr. First Selectman, you 5 to 8 vacancy rate for commercial space?
Yes.
And those figures come from where?
Talking to 3 different large commercial brokers in the area. There's no MLS, so I can't, it's not like the residential MLS where I could quote actual numbers on that, Peter, but it's that talking to John Angel, Tommy Fabrio, and one other group. And
Thank you.
They all came back in that range.
Okay, thank you. Further questions? Yes, I'm sorry, Pam.
Thank you, Mr. Barnard. Do you have a long-term plan for economic development in the plan for the town? Is there something written?
I think that would be one thing after we're done with looking at, as we're going through this planning process with the Affordable Housing Committee, updating the town's affordable housing plan. I think an economic development plan would be appropriate as a next step. I don't think, in terms of the strategic focus of the department, it's going to change a lot, but it would provide, you know, further structure for that and perhaps engage other boards and commissions in that effort, because frankly, there are a lot of things that involve other boards and commissions that we all need to be singing off the same sheet of music, really. So we do have a fairly low vacancy rate, as the First Selectman said. We don't have a lot of developable land. That which we do have, only 4.5% of Fairfield's land mass is actually zoned for commercial industrial uses. So what we're primarily looking at is infill and redevelopment of existing underutilized parcels. So in those situations, it does behoove us to try to maximize, to the extent possible, our limited opportunities and make sure that we're getting the most out of that of limited resources that we have.
So currently, we do not have a long-term plan for economic development, but that is something that you would.
That is something that I think we should
is on your
focus
radar.
on. Yes.
And in doing that, as you think to move that forward, what type of staffing and funding do you think you'd need to get there, and what type of investment should we be planning for as we look at this budget?
I think the model that we used for the Affordable Housing Committee is a good model. We want to probably bring in somebody from the outside that could augment our existing staffs to also bring in an objective viewpoint from outside and apply best practices from other communities. So I think, you know, somewhere in that range, $20,000 to $25,000 would be something that we would be looking at. Typically, that could be supported under the fees and professional services line in most cases, or at least a large portion of it. Again, that might be something we might be able to secure some outside capital. If we had a small commitment on our part, we might be able to leverage that and get some funding participation from some other groups.
Right. And in terms of, I have two other questions related to that. In terms of a city like Shelton or a town like Trumbull, where you see so many buildings going up all the time, I'd be interested in seeing in the long-range plan what they do, what their economic development department looks like, how many staff members they have, what they're devoted to, and what the payback is based on the number of employees in their department and what they're able to bring in for revenue in the town, knowing that they have got a working department. You're only one person. I can't imagine you being able to cover all of this.
Trumbull's structured pretty similarly to ours, although obviously in population size they're a little bit smaller. But I've worked with Ed, who's the Trumbull Economic Development, my counterpart in Trumbull. Shelton's structured a bit differently. They have an Economic Development Corporation, privately funded quasi-public agency that's charged with also assisting in economic development. So they play Jimmy Ryan is the executive director up there, and so they play a large role in terms of what's going on in Shelton and Huntington.
I just want to make sure we as a body are planning for the future in terms of what types of things we need to be investing in and knowing what things are coming down the pike. So,
and again, it goes back to eventually you do need to have property or buildings in which people can invest or locate to. And we don't have a lot of inventory, and we don't have a lot of areas for new development. Some other communities are blessed in some respect in having large tracts of undeveloped land. Maybe they're newer communities and have maybe lagged behind in some areas historically, and they're catching up a bit. We're a much more mature, developed community, so those opportunities are not as many because there just isn't that much land that's actually zoned for that purpose, commercial, industrial. And I don't see the town really as a goal converting residential property for commercial or industrial purposes. It's actually been the reverse, where we've had commercial and industrial zone properties that have been converted for residential purposes.
Thank you.
Just to quickly add to that, the Greater Bridgeport Regional Council, the 6 towns around here, we met this past week, and we're talking about getting our executive director, our economic development directors together to look at more of a region and kind of share resources in terms of what we're looking at from that standpoint. So that's one of the initiatives going on. The second, and that's why when we talk about building more buildings, that's why that Mill River cleanup and getting that remediation plan in place. We got conservation, shellfish, and harbor management to sign off on that this summer, as well as the neighborhood group fair plan. That's proceeding on. So that's a 2 to 3 year project. But when that's done, there's a developer standing in line to start building on that property right away.
Julie? Julie Gottlieb, District 6. Thanks, Mark. Just for my own clarification and perhaps for some of the newer members, can you run through, again, the staffing and just sort out what's here in the budget book and what's covered by grant so we sort of have the big picture?
There are a total of 3 people in the department. One is funded 100% through the Community Development Block Grant Program, and
They're not on this.
That's not here. It's not reflected here. And she is essentially paid for by those federal funds and oversees that program and all programs that the town directly provides as a result of that funding. The positions that are reflected here are myself and the administrative assistant, who is funded 75% through the general fund and 25% from the downtown employee parking program fund.
Great, thanks.
Yes, Mr. Bryan. Alex, I'm sorry.
Hi, thank you. Alex Durrell, District 8. Did the job exist before you were hired by First Selectman Flato?
Yes.
Okay, and I guess it seems like a 600-pound gorilla, but the Metro Center seems to fit a lot of the characteristics and dimensions that you're talking about. What is the status of that? I mean, it's there.
We are actively marketing that site as probably the prime redevelopment opportunity here in town. Again, through the state, through our regional partners. Mike, the first selectman, had mentioned the Greater Bridgeport Regional Council. We're meeting regularly with our economic development counterparts there, and part of that effort is focused on marketing the region and development sites within the region, and Fairfield Metro is the preeminent site within the town. That said, there is, as the first selectman alluded to, a glut of fairly large office space on the market, lower Fairfield County. The Fairfield Metro Center site, as envisioned, was intended to provide for the large office user, the corporate headquarters type facility, typically looking for 50,000 and up, 50,000 square feet and up. And there just aren't, number one, there aren't that many companies looking to move that are in that size, so the universe is pretty small. And then secondly, we're competing directly with not only Lower Fairfield County, but also New York as well, New York City and Westchester. And to be candid, the site is not as attractively priced as I would like, especially when we're competing with Stamford and Norwalk and office product there that is priced comparable to what our space would be priced at, and we're half hour further up the line. So generally where we've had an advantage is as people get priced out of Lower Fairfield County, they tend to move northward, further away from the city, and so we've benefited from that. And we're generally a very attractive community in which to locate your business, to make an investment. And so, again, we've benefited from that vis-a-vis our immediate neighbors. But in this case, the pricing is not as attractive. In fact, one of the companies that we had hopes for in terms of being the first anchor tenant at the site ended up at Merit 7 in Norwalk, and it was based on price. So, and to be fair, the discussion early on was if your decision matrix is such that price is going to be again the primary factor in your process, then perhaps we shouldn't go very far. That was the developer to the company in question. The company indicated that there were other factors that they had in mind, but ultimately the bottom line price was what drove that decision. So there's only so much we can do to affect that. Obviously, we don't own or control the site directly, but we work closely with, there is a broker. We work closely with the broker. We work closely with the developer to help market the site, do what we can to get the word out to folks that might be looking for these opportunities, and we'll continue to do that. In fact, I have a meeting tomorrow to make sure I have the latest in terms of their marketing materials so we can get that information out to our site selection consultants that we'll be meeting with this year.
Now, the company that moved to Norwalk, out of curiosity, they mentioned mass transportation as being a factor because that's not the main line. And that really doesn't run nearly as much as obviously what it does.
Obviously, that wasn't as much a consideration as the bottom line cost of the space. So that's what ended up driving the decision. We think the site is a very attractive site because it has access to mass transit, but not every prospective tenant is going to weight that the same. Some are more driven by that access than others. But we think that's a key attribute for the site, and we think ultimately that'll be a deciding factor for companies that will choose to locate there.
And are we waiting for the building to be made, or are we waiting for a company to say we want the building?
Yeah, he's not, the developer is not building this on spec, so he's looking for at least a 50% commitment up front before he puts, he's already made a little bit of investment in the sense that, I shouldn't say I characterize it, he probably would take exception to that, but he's obviously put the footings and foundation in the ground for the concourse building so that he's ready to erect steel, and but he's looking for a commitment, lease commitment up front for at least half of the building before he goes that. And he's not atypical of most developers, or not many developers actually build things on spec these days.
Not many towns do as much as we did either.
That's true. That's true.
Mr. McCarthy, then Mr. Timniak.
Mark, quickly, are you at all concerned that developers not pricing the market because he has an intention down the road, maybe not looking at an alternate use for that site? I mean, he had raised a trial balloon maybe about a year and a half ago, putting residential or small apartments in that location. Does that concern you at all?
Well, like all developers, he's trying to maximize his return on his investment. So to some extent, he has to be sensitive to the market and what the market will bear, obviously. But ultimately, in the end, he's going to want to put the product out there that would provide the biggest return on his investment. So I don't think that. I know that he has a proposal to do some residential as part of it. He hasn't really advanced that to a formal application stage, and I know that's a concern of many here. But I don't know where that's ultimately going. He hasn't actually put the application out. So I think he'd be best served looking at the commercial product, because I think that's where he's going to get the most return.
Well, I would certainly agree to that, and couple the fact that there was an implied commitment going back from the very beginning.
Absolutely. It's actually approved for about 1 million square feet of office space.
Right. So as a representative of the taxpayer of the town of Fairfield, I would be very concerned if he were to make any more overtures about heading down that road, and I think we ought to
we
make
certainly
it clear.
haven't encouraged him.
Okay. Well, I'm happy to have that discussion, but thank you.
Mr. Timniak?
Yes. Chris Timniak, District 9. Quick question. Have you made a decision, either departmentally or administratively, not to attend trade shows or conferences or real estate conventions to try to attract business?
Oh, we go to those that are located close by, in state, that we have reasonable funds and the ability to attend. And part of the advantage is, as the first selectman alluded to, we're working now in partnership with the Greater Bridgeport Regional Council and the Greater Bridgeport Regional Business Council as well, to market the entire region. And the thought was, if we pool our resources, we may be then able to be more aggressive or more assertive in terms of meeting with site selection consultants, because it won't be necessarily just one town that's trying to do this all on its own. So my intent is to do that. We typically, again, we're meeting with folks generally within in-state, and honestly, you're not really attracting companies from the southeast or southwest or the west coast to Connecticut. Typically, our target is a lot closer in. Companies that are already, they may not be in Connecticut, but they're certainly in the Northeast or a lot closer by. So that's where we're focused on.
Yeah. I was thinking more about the franchisees, whether it's more restaurants or franchise retail stores, which are owned by the larger companies in New York, but go to the franchise conventions, who might be looking to get an footprint in New England or...
See, my experience is we don't really have too much trouble attracting interest from restaurants or retail. The problem is a mismatch between the product that we have and what the retailer's needs are. Because we certainly have a lot of retailers, a lot of restaurants that want to be here. And they want to be here for good reason. Fairfield's a great place to locate your business. But oftentimes we don't have the right product for them. That's been the issue. More so than a lack of interest, we have a lot of interest from folks that are looking to locate here.
That's a good point, and yeah, I appreciate that line of thinking. I just have concerns with lumping us together as a region instead of separating ourselves.
Yeah, it has its limitations, obviously, but in terms of, looking at these larger, I mean, I can only think of one site that we're really trying to market in concert with the region, which is Fairfield Metro. It's so big that it obviously attracts the attention of these site selection consultants, which are typically the folks that are working with corporations that are looking to relocate their corporate headquarters or other major operations. And those deals don't come along all the time. So it's a constant effort of trying to get in front of those people and make sure that we're top of mind. They're thinking about Connecticut, let alone Fairfield County, but they're thinking about Connecticut as a place to do business. So we try to take advantage of whatever opportunities we can to get in front of those folks.
I appreciate your answers. Thank you.
Representative O'Brien.
Hi, Mark. Can you give us a reference point, that tenant that we lost to Merit 7? Can you qualify or quantify where we fell short? You said it was a cost issue.
Yeah.
Are we that overpriced?
No, I wouldn't say it's that overpriced, but or that overpriced. It depends on the product, but certainly, new construction and the argument with Fairfield Metro is that you're going to save on your operating costs because of very efficient floor plates, the newest, most modern LEED certified design, and those are all good, compelling arguments. But there's two issues that work against this. One is simply it's new construction, Class A, all the whiz-bang whistles and everything else, and it's being priced comparable to what you would find in Stamford with access to the train or Lower Fairfield County. The other thing is, if you go to Stamford, Lower Fairfield County, or Westchester County, you can find offices that already exist, so people can touch and feel, and they can look at the space. And what we're showing is, pictures. I mean, they're attractive-looking pictures, but there's no substitute for being able to actually walk around in a space. So I think that's, too, if somebody has a very short-term time horizon, they want to locate, move, within the next 6 months, we're kind of out of the picture because it's at least a year and a half in construction from the moment you say go. So if somebody needs to move that fast, that's another factor as well.
Thank you. Yes. Ellen? Yeah. Okay, we have it in front of you. Why don't you go ahead, Carol?
Mark, I realize all the constrictions that have been put on you in connection with your job. How much support do you get from the Department of Economic Development at the state level, for one thing? And I realize that, all states are in competition in terms of economic development. Certainly, all of us have seen the Startup New York ads, no taxes with new businesses that come in for 10 years. We're not really doing much of anything in Connecticut to really promote new businesses. I wonder, though, the Bridgeport Regional Business Council, good group, but they really haven't accomplished a whole lot in Bridgeport over the years. Look at how long it's taken for Steel Point and the rest of it. The International Council of Shopping Centers holds many different, meetings and workshops and things of that sort in Connecticut over the years. We have people who have developed, great properties for us, the Sportsplex. Do you get together with those realtors, the Clebans, et cetera? And the other thing that I'm curious about, what about the Small Business Association, SCORE, different groups of that sort, along with the other thing that came to my mind was, do we not have any recourse at all in connection with WITIC?
Well, we're and I hate to say this, we've got limited time here tonight, and we really have to stick to the budget. So with all due respect, a lot of good points are being
Yeah,
made.
there it is.
But let's stick to the budget and move forward.
Okay.
Any further questions of Mr. Bernhardt? Please, make it a budget question.
Okay, real quick. Are there any other properties or areas in town that are potential commercially developable? So that if we're stuck in Metro Center for a while, there are other places.
Yeah, we have a list, and topping my list at the present time, I'm working with Paul Miller, who owns 355 Kings Highway, and an issue there is obviously its proximity to the river and some historical flooding issues there, as well as it really classifies as a brownfield site. So. There are a number of challenges, but it was approved previously for mixed-use development, and there are some interest in the sites. We're just trying to knock down any impediments to development. But there are a number of sites that are active candidates. The Fairfield Motor Inn, you may know, is under contract at present time. We have a new Hyundai dealership that's moving over to Commerce Drive. The Sims building has been purchased for $11 million and is going to be the new facility for the orthopedic specialty group. If you look, actually, I made a list of the projects that have been completed and those that are in process, and it's a pretty impressive list. And I shared it with my counterpart at UI, who regularly checks in to see, the status of these things. And, compared to other communities she's working with, we've got a fair amount of business activity going on in town, which I think is indicative of the strength of the local economy.
And your list is available to the RTM members? Is that on your
I
website?
prepared an internal list, but I can certainly, make it available if you wish. It's really what I'm using to try and track development projects as they go through the various approval process, starting with code review all the way through land use approvals and the like.
Thank you. Any further questions? Carol?
I'm sorry.
Seeing none. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you
for
very
your
much.
thorough presentation. Next matter is the presentation by Mr. Mayor. Finance. So if you want to begin, Bob, on the finance aspect of it.
Well, again, I guess bottom line is the finance department is overworked and understaffed. The department staff has been reduced by 20% over the last 5 years. And in the last 15 months or so, the workload has increased significantly. New and enhanced activities include, development and standardization of quarterly revenue expense analysis and reporting, improved accounting and tracking of investments, clean up and improved accounting of fixed assets and capital projects, development and implementation of accounting systems for both the OPEB and retirement systems, develop format and program for capital planning by specific project to provide more long-term, more meaningful long-term capital plan and debt service projections, developed a financial model and process to perform analysis for union contract negotiations. Still on our plate, items would include, top three, development and implementation of cash flow projections to an analysis to optimize the town's investment returns, develop a 5-year financial plan, and participate in the town's development of a strategic plan. The budget itself is relatively unchanged. And are there any questions?
Are there any questions of Mr. Mayor with respect to the finance portion of this hearing? Yes. Tom?
Bob, on page 181, just to make sure I have this correct, there appears to be an addition of one new accountant. Is that a full-time, or is that part-time?
There was a request, half of that position was deleted by the first selectman, and the other half was deleted by the Board of Finance.
Okay, so, all right, so no new full-time employees?
No one full-time, no one part-time, not an extra hour.
Fair enough.
Further questions? Pam, do you have a question?
Thank you. I was a little confused by something that the town librarian said yesterday, but maybe you could clarify for me. Who does the payroll for the library?
The town.
Okay, that's what I thought. I thought I heard her say they handled payroll, but I handled their own payroll, but I clearly misunderstood that. Okay, thank you.
Further questions? Seeing none, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you.
Good evening, Don. Welcome aboard. We have your presentation from the assessor's office. Thank you.
Okay, budget's on page, the messages on page 185. Apart from any discussion of the revaluation, the budget is essentially unchanged. The fees and professional services was the largest non-personnel item that we had in previous years. That was reduced this year as a result of the settlement of a large number of the court cases we had, to echo Attorney Lesser. The fees and professional dropped by approximately $60,800 if we take out, any discussion of the revaluation. Essentially, the budget is unchanged. Minor tweaks here and there, but essentially the budget is about the same as it was last year. Again, not adding any personnel, not discussing personnel, anything, again, within departmental control. The budget's essentially unchanged.
Are there any questions of Don? Yes, Mr. Timniak.
All right, and Chris Timniak, District 9. Can you walk us through the fees and professional services?
Sure.
Essentially the whole breakdown, or the big chunks in that?
Okay, the revaluation, we're not, again, that's a whole nother discussion.
Okay.
But the fees and professional services, $15,000 requested for professional support in the remaining court actions. We have, without getting into specifics, we have a handful of court actions left. As Attorney Lesser mentioned, we had around 200. We're down significantly, 10 to 15 cases, roughly 10 cases. Most of them trials right now as they stand. But there's a significant reduction in support necessity there. So that's a large piece. Let's see what else. $10,000 for personal property audits. That hasn't changed. We do personal property audits on businesses every year. We audit so many businesses. $10,000 fee hasn't changed for many years. So that's a net plus, because we usually will get revenue $50,000, $60,000 for a $10,000 expenditure. So that one really, that has not changed.
How many properties are we auditing for that 10,000?
I'm sorry?
How many properties are we auditing?
20. And again, the audits are business personal property audits.
Right.
Okay?
I know exactly what you're talking about.
Nothing to do with real estate.
Yes. Okay.
Okay. Software maintenance, that's a new item this year, the way the budget's line items were set up. I guess each department, correct me if I'm wrong, each department has an allocation for software. We're not adding any software. We're simply picking up the maintenance fees, license fees for the existing software that we have.
And what's that number?
16,200.
16?
Yep, 16,200. On the existing quality data service assessment administration software, That's separate from the real estate valuation software. The real estate valuation software license and maintenance fees is $8,000.
What was the other?
Okay, the other one, the appraisal vision computer-assisted mass appraisal software, again, existing software. The licensing fees are $8,000. And again, that's just a transfer to a new line item in the budget.
Are you satisfied?
Well, so the rest of that number is going to be for the reval total?
But basically, what remains in the fees and professional services budget for the assessor's office right now is $29,000 for software maintenance. That's contracts for that was transferred from the IT budget, and $24,000 for assessment appeals and copiers and some other stuff. So that's all that remains in the budget. The assessment evaluation was taken out and is in contingency.
Okay.
So
Okay, going on. Yes, Michael?
Michael Hurley, District 1. I do think it's important that we talk a little bit about the reval process. I understand that it's not in your budget, but a significant allocation toward the process is in contingency so that your office can administer the reval. As you know, there are a number of people who were very, very concerned about how things were handled last time, particularly in District 1. Have you prepared a PowerPoint presentation outlining, how you're going to approach the reval?
Okay, we're still in discussion with bidders. Okay, there have been 3 bidders for the revaluation. Okay, we're still in discussion as we speak right now.
Is there an RFP that you created for that?
And there was an RFP that was put out. It came back March 3rd. It went out early February, came back March 3rd.
Can we get a copy of that?
Sure. Sure.
Okay. Could you just, I know we're very constrained for time, but there's a lot of sensitivities to this, particularly in the area, that I represent. What are your overall thoughts in terms of addressing some of the concerns, or maybe this is a better question. I think there was a high number of lawsuits where people sort of protested the assessments they got. What is sort of different or unique in the approach that you're trying to take so that we'll have a much lower level of questionable assessments? And that'll be my only question.
Can you try to do that?
If that makes sense.
Respond to that in a very short manner, if you will.
Okay, very short answer, okay? There's a level of detail that you can use in approaching revaluations, all right? You either can have what's called a full data collection revaluation, full data verification revaluation, or everything down to what's called a limited data verification revaluation, all right? We're looking at conducting a revaluation that's a bit more in depth. Okay, again, values are driven by data, okay? The values that you have in a revaluation are only as good as the data behind the values. Okay, so we're looking at a very thorough approach to the data behind the values. I guess that's the best way to answer the question at this point.
Okay, that's fair. If you could circulate that document through the moderator tomorrow, that'd be very helpful.
Gaylord, then Ed.
Gaylord Meyer, District 1. There was a number mentioned earlier.
I'm sorry.
There was a number mentioned earlier due to the litigations with the reval, about $15 million that would not be in the grand list.
That's overall.
Overall.
Okay.
So my question to you is, it was mentioned that there are still some litigations that are going on with the revals. I think you said 11. Somebody mentioned the number 11. If, in fact, we lose those in court, how is that going to affect the grand list? Again.
Because that's like pending legal stuff, and sharing that information in a public setting is probably not healthy. However, if we lose those numbers will go down. If we win, they won't.
Yeah, but that does affect our budget, so that's the reason I asked the question.
Yeah, and
Thank you.
And again, just from a process standpoint, any adjustments, as the most recent ones done by the Board of Assessment Appeals,
Yeah.
will be reported with an adjusted grand list
Yeah.
to the Board of Finance on the Tuesday night that they set the mill rate.
Thank you.
So that's kind of caught up with the mill rate on that side.
Okay. Just asking the question.
Thank you, Ed.
Thank you. Ed Bateson, District 3. I have two questions in a statement. Maybe the first one is either Don or Mike. Why was the $50,000 added back by the Board of Selectmen? Was that because of an actual bid received? Or is that just a thought process?
That was based on the bids that came back.
Okay, but after hearing Mr. Ross, where you have three bidders, so is that a compilation of those three? That's your average or something like that?
It was basically added back in to allow us, I'm trying to figure out how to say that. Yeah. Give us some flexibility in terms of which bidders and which set of services that we chose.
Okay. Second one, I guess, goes to Mr. Ross. The last reval, what type was that? Was that a full data collection or a limited?
Say that, I'm sorry.
The last reval we did, whatever, 2 years ago, was that a full data collection or a limited?
That was limited.
That was limited. Okay. This is more along the lines of a personal statement. I watched the Board of Finance meeting where the money was transferred into contingency. I thought the Board of Finance brought up an extremely valuable point, and it had me cause to go back and read the charter. I really do think that the Board of Finance has a say in this matter as to what, I read Mr. Lesser's opinion. I thought it was very limited in what he addressed. I think the charter gives somewhat of a broad power base to the Board of Finance, not to dictate, but it really seems like they have a voice in this, and that voice is the voice of the people to interject their feelings and the methodology and the scope of what type of reval we do. Thank you.
Yeah. Again, we're reviewing that with the Board of Finance. The town attorney both wrote that opinion letter, has gone back and looked at state statute as well as the charter. It's pretty clear in terms of where it addresses the assessor, but we'll review that with the Board of Finance so they're clear on it also.
Thanks. I appreciate it, but let's give some cause and some sight to the charter.
We're looking exactly at the charter, and the town attorney's job is to interpret that charter.
Thank you, but let's give a benefit of the doubt to the Board of Finance. If you made it abundantly clear at the Board of Finance meeting what type of reval you wanted and Mr. Ross wanted, and there seemed to be a difference of opinion between you and the Board of Finance.
The Board of Finance didn't specify what they wanted, I don't
But they do have it appears under the charter that they do have a voice in this matter.
Not within the appraisal process. They do in terms of how the data is stored.
I'll disagree on that.
You're welcome to.
Thank you. Any further questions of Mr. Ross? Seeing none, thank you, Don. And finally, our last item on the agenda tonight, information technology.
Another Don.
Good evening.
Hi, Don Leslie, Director of IT.
Thank you.
What can I say? I started out the budget process with a open mind of what I felt we needed and wanted. After a deep review with the first selectman, we made major cuts to my budget. I felt they were justified. It was a working conversation. And after that, the Board of Selectmen, first selectman cut my IT request for a person by half, figuring the timing would come out right. And then the Board of Finance, I'm sort of hitting my high points there. The Board of Finance took that person out completely, so if you see those numbers, oh, and you want a page number probably, sorry.
196, 197.
There you go. And the Board of Finance took that person out completely. I felt they were both very, I thought it was a very important position. Moving along. The fees and professional services part of the budget. Another process there. I'd asked for a consultant in there for $80,000. That had got taken out because we'll use that as a through the capital project. That's coming up soon. The other thing which the other Don mentioned and you asked about, it happened for multiple departments that we moved. After discussion with the first selectman, felt that it was better off to reflect the actual department's cost completely as much as possible. So any software that is very department specific was moved into their budgets, and that was a total of $71,000 that came out of my budget. What else? The new website just came up, as you all have noticed, and just as a side note, purchasing bids and that type of information is underneath the purchasing department if you'd like to look at it. I've included some more money in my budget because, as the notice says right on the front page, it seems like a small project, but it's a very big project, the web page, moving it over and getting it all straightened out. And we've accelerated or moved ourselves into the 21st century with this new website. And with it, we have a lot more functionality. The departments have a better chance to put their information in it. If you'll notice, there's a lot more information there, and that's not even started yet. The websites are a evolutionary type of thing. They do hit big peaks like we just did now, but the important thing about a website is to keep up the data in there. I mean, I don't know if you guys pay attention to copyrights, but you'll see a lot of copyrights on the bottom of people's websites, and it's like 1998 or 2004 or whatever. If you don't keep the website up and if you don't invest in your website, it just goes stale and people just don't pay attention to it much anymore. But if you really do put out good information, they'll keep coming back. I added some money in my budget for that to keep, doing the website, paying people to help it and stuff, and that. So, moving on. Let's see. Repair. Communications, there was a bit of a jump there in the budget, and that was to bring the 3 fire stations and the Smith Richardson Golf Course, who makes money for us, onto the fiber network. It was a bit expensive, but it was needed to help public safety to respond better. They were getting very slow response times. I don't know if anyone knows what the difference was, but they were T1 lines, which is 1.54 megabits. We've upgraded the fiber so that they get 1 gigabit, major upgrade to them, and it works very well. That was needed, and I'm seeing in the future the fact that we've got the Par 3 golf course and the beanery coming up, and I hope to upgrade them to fiber as well so that they get a good connection. What else?
May I ask about line item 54310 on page 195, maintenance repair equipment? There was an increase of 58.2% on that. Could you just describe what that was?
That was the EMC maintenance. Basically, there was a $20,000 jump because of the staging and the timing of the Munis conversion that the town has completed a couple of weeks ago, and the Board of Ed's just about to complete. They've got equipment there that would not fall under Munis anymore, so we're taking over that equipment to recycle it and use it to the best of our ability. It's not going to be on primary
So it's a
financial.
one-time cost, that should be it?
Well, no, because that was to take over the maintenance of the equipment. Once we get the equipment, we'll merge it into our contract, so it's not going to be as much, but there'll be another, it was $20,000 just for their equipment. It'll probably be like $5,000 or $10,000 once we merge it into our contract.
Thanks. Oh, yeah, I'm sorry, Mr. Timniak.
Chris Timniak, District 9. I have a couple questions.
Sure.
And just, I want to go back to your original statement. You submitted a budget which was $230,000 more than what the first selectman took out of it. You said you hashed out a conversation, basically, and agreed?
Yeah,
to that?
between the chief financial officer and Mr. Tetro, we worked out basically, what we really needed versus what I sort of wanted and to do. I mean,
we don't have the power to add back to the budget, but I'm interested to find out, because that's a big discrepancy between a department and essentially the first selectman's office on priorities.
Right, well, part of that was the $70,000 that was moved out for to the other departments. And then $80,000 of that was for the consultant.
So you're comfortable with a $0 contingency?
That was because of a year ago, the Board of Finance moved $100,000 out of fees and professional service and put it into the contingency because they wanted us to come back and explain the munis financing better. And then I only got $75,000 back out of that. And so $25,000 was left there. Okay. I may or may not need it this year, depends on how things go. It's looking reasonably well since we're 3/4 of the way through the year, but that's how that money got changed around.
Okay, so next year it's at 0? Is that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
One of the questions, I hate to break down fees and professional services, but I want to only because, fees and professional services are basically the salary, it's basically the same line item as the payroll. So how much, 411,000, or you put in 411,000, the first selectman cut it to 331.
Right.
Payroll's at 458, so, you're almost $100,000 less than what payroll is. What exactly are we doing? And when I go back and I look at fiscal year 11, this seems to be one of those things which my question goes towards more in-house stuff. What are we capable of doing versus what are we paying to outsource? Because, again, it's a huge discrepancy I'm not in an IT department, but an IT department with this many staff members or this many hands, helping out. It seems like a high number to me. So if you wouldn't mind going over some of the big numbers in that, I'd appreciate it.
So the fees and professional services, you want to review all of my line items?
The big one.
Yeah.
Well, because, again,
All right,
here's the
yeah, no,
situation.
it's fine. I just want to be clear, that's all.
Well, here's a situation which, we had $80,000 taken out, or $70,000 taken out, 80, yeah.
70 taken out,
yeah.
80 put in, 80 taken out.
Yeah, so it's confusing to me at least.
It's confusing to me, too.
Yeah. If you, yeah. So if you wouldn't mind, thank you.
And not to mention the $100,000 that got toasted last year. Okay, starting at the top, admin's tax software, that's old software that has a lot of systems in it that we need to keep for historical purposes. We are in the process of working to get all that data out from 6 different locations into other spots so we don't have to pay that. We're trying to retire the software. The problem is we're legally required to keep that data. So I can't just say, oh, turn it off and we lose all this stuff.
What's that number?
That's 22,000. The Barracuda software is the firewall, the three devices, the firewall, the spam, and the network balancing. Because we needed more bandwidth, we had to add a line to the system so that we could talk out to the world. The ESRI ArcGIS, we've been holding off on that. This is sort of kicking the can down the road, but for a smart reason, was Bridgeport Regional Council, the GIS group over there that was formed about 2-3 years ago, came to the town, asked for some funding from the 6 towns. We gave them some funding. They brought in a new GIS system. Because they were bringing in a new GIS system, we have kept our GIS system the same since I've gotten here, which was in 2009. If anyone knows about software and hardware, that's very ancient for software and hardware.
What's that number?
For the GIS software, it's 22,000. And that's to upgrade our systems. Now that we know what Bridgeport can do, now that they're up and running, we can upgrade our system and get a very nice complementary system that leverages their work and our work. Because, you know, from a regional point of view, they're not going to do every single thing we want in GIS, and from a GIS point of view, we're not going to do everything they want. But if we sit there and literally merge these two things together, they have servers, we have servers, and they've got a web system set up. Our servers talk to the web system, their servers talk to the web system, and we can have a really great system coming online here. One important but small example was, if you'll remember Storm Sandy, we were putting out GIS updates about every 2 or 3 or 4 hours. With the new system, we would be able to do that dynamically online, so that the telephone poles that are down, the lines that are crossing the street, power lines that are down, cable television lines that are down, we can sit there and we would be able to track them as fast as someone who has a device can see it and mark it down. It would come into the system. And so for recovering from Storm Sandy, one of the problems was just exactly where do things stand at that point in time, and you know, where do we need to send the utility trucks? Where do we need to send the tree cutter trucks? Where do we need to send the other trucks? This would make that response a lot better as a simple example of what this GIS system would.
Do all towns do that?
Say what?
Do all towns have that system?
Not all. I mean, it's a matter of funding, finance, and stuff like that. Yes, a fair amount of towns have it. The ones that are more advanced and more progressive are doing that.
Are you satisfied with that?
Yeah, well, are you done with all the...
Oh, sorry. I get sidetracked easily.
Let's get back on course.
All right, moving down, we have the Munis software. That went down a little bit because of we moved to the cloud. So my actual cost for that in the fees and professional services gone down.
I just sort of want to get the title and add them up.
Oh, okay. So, well, you had the admin stock software for $22,000. You had the Barracuda software for $6,500. You've got the GIS software for $22,000. You've got $151,000 for the Munis software. You've got $19,000 for Shavlik software, which is PC patch software that patches the PCs in town, so we keep we keep them up to date, the software up to date. We have the Symantec virus software for $22,000. We have VMware licensing for $20,000, and we have Network Synergy, who is our backup support company. If my guys can't handle it, it gets too complicated, or we don't have enough time to do it, those are the people we talk to. We keep them on a retainer, and that's for $35,000. Getting into the web aspects of it, there's $10,000 for just general web work from different vendors or whoever we need. There's $10,000 for the maintenance on for the QSend site that's hosting our website now. And then there's the Vision Appraisal, which is the part of Don Ross's stuff.
Yeah.
That's for, that's their website, that's the website function of that, and that's for $4,000. And then we have a couple of websites up at Network Synergy, who is the support company of ours, and their maintenance on that is $2,000 a year. And then there was a internet security testing for $7,500. Out of those numbers, you'll come up to $331,000. Subtract $30,000 from that because the Board of Finance took it out. I have not exactly decided where that's going to go, but the one thing that will go is, because I feel reasonably confident about our internet setup and our vendors and stuff like that, the internet security testing's out the window. So if someone really wants that.
And that's 7K there, internet
Yeah.
security? Okay, my next question is, out of all these fees and licenses we're paying, how have we compared ourselves to neighboring towns on what we're doing? Because, I mean, again, like, I'm not an IT guy, but I have done the comparisons. It seems like a larger number than it needs to be.
I don't think so.
Okay. That's fine.
Sure.
Let me
That's
address
it. I
that
mean,
question.
I appreciate that answer. You're the IT guy, so.
Let's try to...
You own you have software, you don't own it. You rent it, you have to pay maintenance, you have to pay licensing fees. The town has software in the assessor's office, it has finance software, it has the GMIS software, it has the Munis software, tax collector software. We use all this software. If you take that $300 or whatever $1,000 and you add up each one of those items, and also we have broadband, everything that's on that list, with the exception of the GIS there,
Right, the GIS upgrade.
is required to pay the bill for the maintenance and service of the current software the town uses to run its operations. So the IT budget is tight. The Board of Finance, and I made this comment at the end of the Board of Finance meeting, the Board of Finance, when they made their cuts, chose to have a dialogue with every department manager, with the exception of the IT department manager. They made $60,000 worth of cuts from the IT department without having any conversation with Mr. Leslie or myself, or Mr. Tetro. That was after Mr. Tetro's cuts. Now, you could not do the GIS, which, as Mr. Leslie pointed out, is helpful to the Department of Public Works, helpful to fire, helpful to police. But you can't take anything else out of that budget without being detrimental to the town's operations.
All right.
Yes, Pam?
Mr. Leslie, at a previous RTM meeting, I was asking about some reports that the fire department had put together and the Board of Education, and the first selectman told me that he didn't have a color printer, and I promised not to cut a color printer from his budget if one were requested. I see you're requesting replacement printers and some other printing material. Are any of them color printers?
I have not had an actual color printer request from the first selectman's office. If I did, I would have jumped rather rapidly relative to the position.
Thank you.
Okay. Just quickly, and did answer one of my questions. Laura Devlin, District 3. Just to clarify, so the $71,000 that was taken out, Dan mentioned, part of that was put into the assessor's budget, et cetera. You kind of divvied that out. That is a standing deduction, right? So that wasn't reallocated out to other departments and then additional monies backfilled. It's an absolute reduction out of your budget, correct?
Yes, yeah, it's not
Okay.
coming back.
And then can you just tell me, just describe, what are special departmental supplies? Did I see they were increased over from,
Was it
Yes.
90 initially?
No, the actual increase now is $17,000 because of the Board of Finance cut.
Okay, but can you just tell me what's in there? I don't need a line by line, I just don't know what special departmental supplies are, because even as though it's just a $17,000 increase, it's still from $72,000 of a full year 13 actual.
There are two main they're,
That's special departmental supplies.
at this point in time, it's not that really much. The big item in the special department supplies is software.
My colleague has pointed out to me exactly where I can find that, so I'm sorry. Thank you, I have my answer.
No problem. Just out of the book, subtract $30,000.
That was the question I was going to ask. Yes, you addressed that.
Further questions? Yes, Alex.
Am I on? Yes. Okay, Alex Durrell, District 8. So your budget, I figured out, is approximately 5/1,000ths of the total budget for the town of Fairfield.
Good for you.
And what are other towns, like what's Westport? Do you have any idea? I'm sure you have some type of, I think you may have answered it.
The
with Mr.
problem with
Toomey.
comparing IT between different towns is that there is lots of differences. You not only have lots of differences in the personnel that is considered IT, because quite frankly, if you consider our IT department, I've got two people that should be in my department that are not. I've got the police IT person and I've got the library IT person. So how do you answer that? So a lot of them do that way. Some people even separate, the fire department has their own IT, the police department has their own IT, the library has their own IT. Obviously, we have the Board of Ed IT, and then so it's very hard because you're not doing apples to apples. And the other, well, there's one point I want to make was the personnel, and the other one, yeah, it's gone. There was some other reason, but yeah, it's very hard to compare them. I sort of tried to do it, and the numbers just don't make any sense.
Catherine?
Hi, Catherine Burstein, District 2. Just a couple quick questions. First of all, John, thank you. I'm actually in IT as well, so I know it's a tough job and you don't always get a lot of thanks. And IT is very expensive. Software maintenance, there are a lot of fees associated with that. My question is in regards to the computers and the servers that we have. I see we have a few that are virtual. The equipment that we have, are we proactively maintaining that equipment?
We maintain them, I like to think proactively.
Or is it more putting out fires as?
We are positively reactive is maybe the best way to say this. Because of, I did an analysis of lifespans and sort of standard lifespans. We should be spending in the capital area, if we go on a 4-year lifespan for equipment, we should be spending $274,000 in the capital area of recycling the equipment. If we went on a 5-year cycle, it should be $219,000, and I'm surviving on $115,000. So obviously, I'm not being proactive, because if I was, I'd be using corporate standards of replacement cycles, and I just pop them out and pop them in.
Yeah.
We sit there, we wait for the machine to die, we wait for someone to complain, hey, it's so slow I can't use it anymore.
Okay.
So I sit there and we stick in a new machine. We don't take the old machine away, we recycle it, we cut it apart, we take out the memory, we take out the disk drives, we take out the fans, we take out whatever we need, and then we dump the thing in there, and don't ask me about donating it or giving it to someone else, because by that time it's a piece of crap.
Got it.
Is that for the record?
Yes.
One more quick question. I believe you had mentioned outsourcing was around $35,000. Company Network Synergy.
Network Synergy, right, our
Okay.
support company.
So how often are we utilizing them? Do you have a record of that? How often are the calls?
It's gone down a lot since I got here, because one thing is we brought in a systems administrator, which saved us a lot of money.
Okay.
That was just after I got here. It's decreased over time, and we really use them now for what I consider a good purpose, in the sense that, you know, they come in and help. I mean, like, they help with our LAN network, and we've got the wide area network company that helps with the WAN network.
Sure.
They help with our PC problems, they help with VMware problems.
Okay.
They, you know, occasionally we'll have a printer that just, you know, these printers are big and expensive, and we really don't want to just throw the thing out, so we'll call them in to, you know, really, after my guy can't figure it out, they'll dig into it and figure out what's going on.
Now the $35,000, is that off of a retainer that we pay them, or is that?
It's like, I had this big conversation with the chief financial officer. He said, no, they're not retainers, and I said, yes, they are retainers, and he said, no, they're not. We pay up front to get discounted services.
Okay, so you're paying for blocks of hours?
Right, exactly. I'm buying basically blocks of hours, and so, you know, once it gets down to about $1,000 or so, I'll cut them another check for $10,000 or $15,000, depending on how much money I have,
Okay.
to keep them going.
Okay. One other very brief question or clarification. In regards to the fiber line, you mentioned we've done that for, did you say the fire department as well as the golf course?
Stations 3, 4, and 5 got upgraded to fiber. 1 and 2 were already done a long time ago.
Okay.
And then the HSR golf course, Smith Richardson.
Okay.
And I'd like to do par 3, and there are a couple other smaller ones that would be nice, but, you know, they're surviving.
Do you think they, a place like a golf course, what's the reasoning for them having fiber? Is that
They make
needed?
money for the town.
Yes, but,
Bad response time, they're running on a T1 versus a 1 gigabit line or a 1,000 megabit line.
okay.
Slow response time. Software is getting more advanced and not complex, but requiring bigger bandwidths.
How many computers does the golf course have?
They've got 1 at par 3.
Par 3, okay.
The Smith Richardson has 3. And then it's also, we actually turned it off because the lines were so bad, but it also provide Wi-Fi access, guest Wi-Fi access at these locations for the people.
Okay.
And it's also going to be part of the beanery situation because the par 3 and the beanery are part 1
Okay.
unit, sort of.
It is, Cablevision isn't an option, the Cablevision internet, like a high-speed?
We need them to connect back into town, so by the time you sit there and put in a Cablevision line, and then you put the VPN over it, you have the problem of, but most people don't know, is the internet's never been guaranteed in their life, right? So you can't
That's
count on
true.
the internet.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right.
And so you don't do it that way because it's just not worth it.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Sure.
Thank you. Further questions of Don? Yes, Chris.
Just last year, this Chris Timniak, District 9. Just last year, the state offered a grant to upgrade fiber optic wires throughout municipalities. Did we apply for any of those?
We were going to, the state has put in a fiber line in the police department and a fiber line in the fire department. I was trying to get them to put a fiber line up at Fairfield Woods, because that's my disaster recovery site, and it would also come from Fairfield University, which is our emergency operations center backup site. If we lose the police department and the fire department, we're heading up to the Fairfield University place. So they're the POP, they're the point of presence for the CEN Nutmeg Network fiber connection, so it would be run from them to the Fairfield Woods Library. And what that would give us is, it would give us the connection out, but it would also give us a connection over to Fairfield University. So if we had to go up there, we could actually connect backward through into our systems in Fairfield Woods Library, which is where our disaster recovery site is.
Okay,
so we could actually bring systems up.
we didn't apply for it.
We were going to, but it was $10,000 of our cost, and with the way these budgets are going, it was not. I was going to put it in my budget, and the timing was off, and the extra $10,000, we said, we'll save it this year.
Okay, so what would it cost to run the fiber optic line without the grant?
Probably about 25, 30.
30.
And the reasoning was, the state has just put this in, and they haven't really done that much with it. I was putting it in as a future want, need type of thing, saying, well, the whole point of these fiber things is that we would not only be able to shoot up data to the state, but we could also sit there and merge with our towns around us and do
right. No, I understand what you're saying,
services.
but now I'm juggling in my head that you want to run fiber optics up to the golf course for 3 computers, but you don't want to connect our emergency services through a state grant. Is that an accurate statement?
No, that's not accurate at all.
Okay. Then I missed it then. So we don't want to run fiber optics up to the golf course?
I want to run fiber up. We ran it up to Smith Richardson. That's a done deal.
Okay, so that's
I want to run it out to par 3 so that they have a good response time, so their systems, because of the software, it would work better, and they wouldn't go down. They wouldn't have people standing in the golf line saying, hey, what's wrong with your computer system? Oh, my computer system's down.
Okay.
We don't want that. It just doesn't look good. The part that you're talking about is the Nutmeg Network. That is a combination of the CEN network, the Connecticut Education Network, and the PSDN network is the Public Safety Data Network.
Right.
They had the two separate ones, they put them together, it's all called Nutmeg now, but it isn't. All right, so then we were going to go for a connection from Fairfield Woods over to the university, into the CEN part of the network. The fire department and the police department both have connections in their buildings, and we have just cross-connected the police department one into our network, but they're still not ready yet. They haven't brought the services up on top of the network. We
Okay.
just got the full. I've got the option to do that over at the fire department too.
Okay.
So
Well, I guess my only concern is that, one, the state may not offer that grant again next year.
they sound, I mean, you never know, but they sound positive. I mean, that was part of it. I said, hey, please hold my paperwork for next year. They said, no problem.
Thank you. Any final questions? Thank you, Don.
Sure.
And thank the attendees who spoke tonight and who are sitting in the audience, and want to really thank the RTM members for the last 3 nights that you put in here, and for your perseverance and your dedication. Thank you so much. Motion to adjourn? So moved. I'll accept that. Thank you.